Today's February the 6th, 2019. I want to invite any interested in following online. We do have a live webcast. It can be found at the Kentucky Department of Education website. I want to thank our interpreters for being here today, as well as our closed captioning folks. If you have a cell phone, I'd ask that now would be a great time to silence it. So thank you. Marty, if we could have a roll call.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Ben Cundiff.
Here.
Tracy Cusick.
Here.
Rich Gimmel.
Here.
Kathy Gornick.
Here.
Hal Heiner.
Here.
Gary Houchins.
Here.
Elisa Johnson.
Here.
Joe Papalia is not with us today. Milton Seymour.
Here.
Amanda Stamper.
Here.
Laura Timberlake.
Here.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. All right, if you join me now, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
He's got Marty in his hair. Did you see it?
right now. If you pardon? Okay. If you join me in a minute of silence, and just in consideration of the weighty subjects we have before us today. Thank you. Thank you. Our first item is approval of the meeting minutes for the December 5th, 2018 regular meeting. Do we have a motion for their approval?
So moved.
Okay. We have a motion from Elisa and a second from Laura. Thank you. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Any discussion? We have a motion and a second. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. All right, passes unanimously. Our next item on the agenda is a report of the Secretary of Education and Workforce Development, but I think may move that one later on. Both of our reports. The next item, item 8, is the Commissioner's report.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
It's great to see everyone. I'm using a little bit different format for my report than have used in the past. Different than the past, I want to take this opportunity to kind of hone in on, focus on one issue where we are strategically aligning our priorities and have some conversation with you. But before I do that, I would like to recognize our new KDE employees. From the Office of Education Technology, we have Forrest Clay Thompson, Assistant Director, Division of School Technology Services. Thank you, Forrest. From the Office of Finance and Operations, we have Jennifer Hart, Human Resources Administrator, Division of Resource Management, KSB. Thank you, Jennifer. Not with us today, but in the Office of Finance and Operations, we have Jim Tackett, Federal Program Coordinator, Division of District Support, Student Tracking and Data Branch. From the Office of Standards, Assessment and Accountability, we have Thomas Klaus. Education Academic Program Manager, Division of Program Standards. From the Office of Career and Technical Education and Student Transition, not with us this morning, but we have Leslie Bullock, Education Academic Program Consultant, Division of Student Transition and Career Readiness, Student Leadership Development Branch. And in the Office of Commissioner, we have, in his second day, Christopher Musgrave, Director of Government Relations. Welcome to all of our new KDE employees. So I'd like to take the opportunity to talk with you a little while this morning just about the imperative of closing achievement gaps in Kentucky. It's no secret that we have made tremendous strides as a state in key areas. We've made tremendous strides in key areas, including our high school graduation rate. We have raised academic achievement. We've been noted for creating greater equity in the way that we fund schools with the Kentucky Education Reform Act. In fact, with CARA, we've been noted nationally as a leader in education reform, a state that was willing to take its entire system of public education, completely dismantle it, and build it anew from the ground. I believe those types of fundamental reforms in the early 1990s, led by Kentuckians, parents, educators, community members, are what have laid the foundation for the public education system that we have today, one where we are no longer 47, 48, 49, but where we're consistently lauded as a system that's in the mid-30s. Usually there are about 15 states or more where we lead in education indicators. Now, we still face some significant challenges. One of those indicators that we continue to look at outside of the education system is our progress in education has not moved the needle on workforce participation in the way that we want to see it. So while many more Kentuckians are graduating high school, while we've raised achievement, we still rank 46th and 47th of the 50 states and D.C. in terms of our workforce participation. It would take over 100,000 more Kentuckians to go to work every workday just for us to become an average state with workforce participation. As well, our college-going rates have not risen as much as you would expect, particularly with the high school graduation rate that we have. We're not sending nearly as many young people into post-secondary education as we need to. And when we say post-secondary education, we're talking about any type of education beyond high school, whether it's for a certificate, a diploma, a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree. Earning some type of post-secondary credential is absolutely necessary for every one of our young people. The jobs that are being created now require post-secondary education. So we have to move the needle there. We have to do better with addressing the enormous skills gap that we face. The reality that most of the open jobs, the open good-paying jobs in Kentucky require skills, require credentials that Kentuckians simply don't have. We're starting to do some of that work in our high schools. There's exciting work happening in our high schools and our technology centers around that work, but we have a long way to go. But one of the most notable areas of progress where we've yet to really move the needle is on closing achievement gaps. Even with the significant progress we've made over the last few decades, the gaps between the performance of kids of color and their white peers, economically disadvantaged kids and their non-economically disadvantaged peers, those gaps remain enormous. And in fact, in the last couple years, the last 3 to 5 years, we've made little to no progress, and in some districts actually regressed, with the gaps between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged students of color and white students actually widening. We have tremendous work to do. So I want to highlight one school district for you. The data are real, but I'm not using the name of the school district. That district is highlighted for you in the report that I've shared. Let's call this district Wildcat Independent. So in Wildcat Independent, 41% of economically disadvantaged students at the elementary level score proficient or higher in reading. That's compared to 69% of their non-economically disadvantaged peers. In mathematics, only 36% of economically disadvantaged kids score proficient or higher, as compared to 66% of their non-economically disadvantaged peers. Even more scary in math is those gaps widen as we move from elementary to middle and from middle to high school in Wildcat Independent. The racial achievement gaps in the district are just as significant. The only difference would be the scores of African American students as a group are so low that even while the gaps remain pretty significant, the scores are so low that it causes even greater concern. So for example, 34% of African American students, elementary students, score at the level of proficient or higher in mathematics as compared to 56% of their white peers. And then at the middle school level, that percentage dropped from 34% to 24% of African American students. And then at the high school level, dropped even further to 23% of African American students. So we have significant gaps, significant. I don't think anybody would argue about the significance of these gaps between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged kids. African American kids and white kids. The scores of Hispanic kids are pretty low as well. With one difference, as compared to African American kids, you see slight increases. You don't see those increases for African American students, though. The challenge is this. We know very well that the factors contributing to achievement gaps, socioeconomic and racial, are multiple. We know that the factors that contribute to why we see such significant gaps include home variables, they include community variables, and they include school level factors. All three of those, there is no doubt. But we also know from the research that even if we can't change home and community variables, that changing some school level factors can and does, in fact, impact academic and behavioral outcomes. This is not my guess. This is what the research shows. So let's get this argument out of the way that the commissioner thinks schools can solve the challenges that we face with poverty and with challenges at home. Let's eliminate that argument, and let's suffice it to say, because it is absolutely true, that those variables matter tremendously. If they didn't matter tremendously, we wouldn't spend the type of time we do with our children and our grandchildren in supporting them outside of school to ensure that they're successful. Those things are important, okay? Now let's talk about school. Even when those things don't change, those things that schools have no control over, the research shows that demographically similar students, socioeconomically, racial and ethnically, intelligence, ability levels, if you change only teacher behavior, if you change only the quality of instruction, if you change only the exposure of kids to content at grade level, if you change expectations of kids in the classroom, regardless of their background, that behavior and academic outcomes change for kids. There's no doubt about it. So am I suggesting that we shouldn't, as a society, continue to push the needle on those things, on improving home and community variables for kids? Absolutely not. Am I suggesting that we don't need strategic investment in key places in education in order to make the advancements that we need to make? Absolutely not. We need all of those things. But in addition to that, we need to have much more serious conversation about some of the things that we can do and that some of our districts are doing right now that are around changing our practices. Many of those practices, quite honestly, that don't cost them any more money. We have to change effective instruction. We have to ensure that kids, regardless of their background, regardless of their school, have access to high quality and effective instruction. We have to ensure that people have high expectations for our kids and understand that loving our kids doesn't mean lowering expectations for them. In fact, loving them means raising expectations for them. We have to ensure that leadership at the school level, at the district level, and at the state level doesn't ignore or minimize the incredible achievement gaps that we continue to face and instead acknowledges them and is willing to address them head on. One of the steps that this board has taken that is incredibly significant in that respect is the inclusion of an achievement gap indicator in the accountability system. Never before has an accountability system in Kentucky placed such great urgency on the need to not just increase achievement, but to reduce the disparity in performance between groups of students, because we recognize, this board recognizes, that in order for our kids to be successful and our Commonwealth to be successful, we cannot continue to have educational haves and have-nots. Everybody has to move. And for kids that we have not been able to move historically, we have to move them even faster. When you're behind in a race, you run faster. You don't run slower. So we have tremendous work to do. I congratulate this board and thank this board for the urgency that you have placed on the achievement gap. I congratulate and thank our districts and our educators across the state who are in fact deciding to face these challenges head on. We're going to hear from one of those districts today, Boyle County, who's doing some really innovative, using some innovative instructional practices to meet the needs of kids, particularly around engagement. But I want to say just one more time that we have lots of work to do. This is not the time to retrench. This is not the time to make excuses. This is the time to acknowledge the challenges we face them head on, and find ways to reach kids like we've never reached them before. So I'm happy to take any questions. As a part of my report, I included a couple studies that I'd recommend that you take a look at. One of them is the Opportunity Myth. From TNTP, a national group that's done research across the country that is really guiding and framing much of the work that we're doing in the department right now. It's around the opportunity myth. And the myth is this. The myth is that regardless of your background, economics, race and ethnicity, disability status, that if you just show up to school and do what folks are asking you to do in school, that you're going to be okay. The research finds that that's not actually the case. Because unfortunately, disproportionately so, low-income kids, kids of color, kids with disabilities don't have the same access to effective instruction. They don't have the same access to curriculum at grade level. They don't have the same access to adults who have high expectations of them. So I encourage you to take a look at that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Question.
Well, my question would be, Dr. Lewis, what do we do? If classroom environment is the one key variable that we can at least influence, what are we going to do to improve that? Specifically, what can this department do to bring about that improvement?
Yeah, so it's a laundry list of things. There are a lot of things that the department is working on. There are a lot of things that some of our school districts are working on. Some of the key things we're working on, recognizing that there's no school level variable more important than having an effective classroom teacher, is we are really starting to push the envelope on recruitment and preparation of teachers. Working in partnership with our educator preparation programs, we're asking key questions about the preparation of teachers. We're working in partnership with them to recruit really talented, high-ability people into the teaching profession, folks that we know are going to be able to have an impact on our kids. We're talking about professional development. We are revising and rolling out new academic standards, right? The standards, the expectations for what kids are going to learn. We're having conversations about how we roll that out to the state, how we ensure that teachers are prepared to deliver those standards with fidelity. One of the things we learned from the last rollout of academic standards in Kentucky, one, it happened really fast. And it happened so fast that a lot of our educators didn't have time to catch up to where the standards were, and they didn't have great clarity on what the standards meant, hindering their ability to be able to deliver instruction, standards-based instruction at grade level. That's one of the key things I think we have to do different with rollout of academic standards this time.
Other questions? Commissioner, thank you for that report, and I appreciate especially the clarity, the focus on the achievement gap. I mean, we all know the world has changed over the last couple of decades, and the pace of change is accelerating. You know, just stop into a McDonald's, other fast food place, it's all touchscreen, right? One cash register left, maybe. Walmart, anywhere. Technology is eliminating the low-skill jobs, and our kids needing to get beyond high school, and you're not going to be able to get beyond high school unless you achieve at level or nearly at level in the K-12 system. So I appreciate your focus on where we're headed. Thank you. All right. We'll now move to the report of the Secretary of Education and Workforce Development. Secretary
Good morning,
Ramsey.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I apologize for being a little tardy. A few things I wanted to talk about this morning. One of the things that we're really excited about now, of course, is the launch of the dashboard. And we're going to show you in a few seconds here what this is all about. Part of the reason I'm excited about this is when I had taken this position, one of the things that I wanted to have happen was reduce the number of weeks that people were being employed. Also, I want to have some accountability from our career centers, because these career centers were known more for unemployment than employment. And so there's been a whole mindset change. And so to make these things happen with this dashboard, then there will be more accountability, which is what we're pushing for. There are a few highlights that I'll talk about, and then if you would indulge me, we're going to show a small dashboard video. With this dashboard, the features of interactive map illustrates the performance of ranking, establishing the foundation of understanding strengths and challenges facing throughout the Commonwealth. Top-level measures: workforce participation rate, job openings, unemployment rates, and wheel of funding. Employer metrics: we want to see where the penetration rate is, repeat customer rate, and employer offering apprentices. And this part in particular is critical, because what was happening was people were going to our career centers and we were not getting an accurate accounting. People were being duplicated accounting, so we actually didn't know how. With this dashboard now, it will make that more than possible. Customer metrics: credentials obtained, employment, and apprenticeship. Another piece, adult education metrics, percentage of working adults without a high school diploma, adult enrollment in Skills U without a high school diploma and high school equivalent. That again is critical because, and I'll talk further about this after we see the video here, but adult ed is moving to our cabinet now. So if we could please show this video, if we queue it up back there.
The Education and Workforce Development Cabinet and the Kentucky Center for Statistics have collaborated to produce an interactive dashboard to display critical workforce information for each of the Commonwealth's 10 local workforce areas known as LWAs. The dashboard features a map that illustrates where each LWA ranks across a series of measures and can be dynamically updated to illustrate rankings on specific measures for a particular LWA by clicking on that region. These measures include top-level measures, funding measures, employer metrics, customer metrics, unemployment insurance metrics, and adult education metrics. Hovering over any of the dots will provide more detail on the region's specific rank, as well as detail on that specific metric. Users can access the dashboard by visiting kystats.ky.gov, selecting Explore the Data, and then View Reports.
Thank you very much. This just gives you a small snapshot of what we're looking at, because again, with the number of folk that we have this morning, we have 111,000 open jobs. We have to find people to put in these particular jobs. And so again, with this dashboard, that's more of an accountability system, because we have a lot of conversation before it's actually been accountable. Folk haven't been held accountable. And that's something that we're aggressively trying to do. That's one. And second, now moving to this, where we're going to have this accountability in there. What this will also do is, with this system, because again, when you're having the mindset of unemployment versus employment is a totally different mindset. Next, I'd like to talk about adult education, something I'm really excited about because it's personal to me. One, on January 28th, our governor signed the placing adult ed over to the workforce cabinet. And so what's significant about that is, you've probably heard me talk about this. Last year we had 347,000 people that did not have a GED nor a high school diploma. After last year, we had 3,200 people that got their GED, another 10 or 12,000 that aged out. So at present, we still have 337,000 people that do not have a GED nor a high school diploma. And so there's this big audience out there that we're trying to capture now. Further, we're just going to have a collaboration with Justice. Justice in the parolee system, there's 47,000 people that are parolees. Of that 47,000, 16,000 of those do not have a GED nor a high school equivalent. We're also going to be working with Health and Family Services. Health and Family Services, on average, they have 1 million people that go between their doors and on the computer throughout the year. Of that 1 million people, 60,000 of those do not have a GED or a high school equivalent. So my point is this: when we have this 111,000 jobs, and as we fast forward in the next 5 years, that number is going to go between 300 and 350,000, then up to 700,000 by 10 years. So for us to be effective, we have to have these people in the workplace. And so what I'm most excited about is that they're found. Because again, we just had that number, but then there are additional numbers that are there. And so that's of course exciting. So as we look back, going back to my notes here, fiscal year 2017-2018, more than 19,000 students were enrolled in Skills U. We continue to provide free adult services in all 120 counties, helping to ensure Kentuckians receive education needed to employment in high-demand sectors. Adult ed is also required as a required partner under Federal Workforce Initiative Opportunity Act. Under WEIR, the scope of adult education focuses on transitioning adults to post-secondary education training in an effort to create successful career paths to self-sufficiency. Last piece I'd like to speak to you about, no, that's not true. Work Ready Scholarship. As I stated before, then Secretary Heiner had it where we were able to pay for 32 credits. Last year, we were able to get that up to 60 credits. So that bill is now in play. The last piece, Governor's Office of Early Childhood, that will be transferring over to our cabinet as well. Now, that to me is so significant, and that is significant because, and I tell you, after having them over with us for this short time, it is amazing to me, because I've always worked at the university level. It is amazing to me where it all starts. And it's been demonstrated to me by Linda Hampton that from age 3 up into 3rd grade, we have an opportunity to change the fortunes of these kids' lives. I believe that. Dr. Lewis also shared with me that as a 3-year-old, these kids can be prepared, and by the time they're in 3rd grade, they've gotten worse. And so when we see this kind of data, it's incumbent upon us to do things differently. But now that we have the data, we now need to take this thing and do something with it. And so one of the things that Commissioner Lewis and Dr. Thompson, we're talking about how we can work together to change the fortunes of these young people. So that's what we're working on in education right now. In addition to getting folk into the workplace and trying to fill these jobs, because as you're all aware of, and as was stated by Commissioner, our world is changing. Our world is changing faster than we know and faster than many recognize. And so with that, if we're going to be competitive, these are some of the small things that we need to do to ensure that we're competitive. Take any questions, sir.
All right. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on next to the report of the President of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so glad I came in a little bit tardy myself to hear the Commissioner give his report first, because I have to tell you, it mirrors somewhat the conversation we're having in post-secondary. What we know is that we've done a pretty good job if you look at purely measuring how many people we're getting in college and getting out. We've been terrible when you look at the gaps. Same issues. I also wanted to tell you and really reflect on his statement that's so true in research for both post-secondary and post-secondary, that what we know is you may not be able to fully emulate what goes on in the communities and at home, but you can have a huge impact with a powerful educational institution. What we know is that teachers and professors doing high expectations, performing high rigor, and doing a lot of high inputs can close gaps tremendously. As a matter of fact, those 3 elements are the only thing we have in research that really shows how to close gaps, unless you're starting out on equitable footing coming into the system and getting equitable treatment while you're in the system, and then having equitable opportunities when you get out. So we talk about opportunities a lot. What scares me is that we assume that that word means the same to all of us, and in fact that we all have opportunities to understand that that's a choice for us, and that's not the case. So I appreciate coming in. My staff told me I needed to stick to my notes this morning, so I'll try. Started listening to her last week and started in Clay County, which is my home county. And we wanted to, coming in this year, we wanted to do a series of listening tours to find out what's going on in communities around Kentucky when it comes to post-secondary and their thoughts on post-secondary. And I wanted to do this by talking with employers in the region, talking with our K-12 partners, P-12 partners, talking with the community members themselves, and so on. So we had a chance to go to Clay County and do all that, and I had a chance to talk with students. They gave me a tour of the facilities, and I have to tell you, we've got this ATC that's located many miles from the high school, and it's subpar. And I'm talking to these kids, and they all want to get engaged in some of these ATC offerings, and also with what's going on in that high school building, and they can't. and I see why. And what we know, by the way, the more applied we do some of our educational techniques, the easier it is to close gaps also. So that's the thing that really struck me, is that many of these kids, they may not have opportunity, Mr. Secretary, to take part in this. I also had a chance to talk with them about their perception of post-secondary. And many of them thought that I can't go to a four-year college. And when I pointed out post-secondary represents not just the four-year colleges, but also a credential coming out of high school. It also represents our community and technical system. And how we can have that conversation is what we need to be doing on my end of this. And when I also found out that many of the kids said, well, I can't go to college because my family, they just can't afford to go to college. We need to do a better job of helping them to understand that they can afford and how to provide them with that information. I know Kia, myself, the Commissioner's office, we're all trying to do that better, but we have to do it better. Had a chance to talk with community members, people that are trying to employ these folks in the communities, and they're saying that they need more people with these middle school technical expertise, but they also need people with employability skills, how to come into work on time, how to stay there the entire time, how to dress properly, how to communicate with people around them. So we're called to even do a better job on that end. And I also had the opportunity, obviously, to speak with many family members who told me their desire for their kids to go to college, their desire for their kids to do better. Many wanted the kids to come back, but not in that old sense that they just wanted them to come back and be under them. They wanted them to come back and help build the community. So we've got to figure out how to build an economic development system in that area, obviously with post-secondary as a part of that conversation. The CPE board will have a retreat later on this month where we will be meeting with many people that are a part of the conversation that we sometimes leave out, like our students, our student body presidents, our presidents, and other folk, to talk about how we can do a better job in preparing that particular element of our society to get ready for jobs outside of post-secondary. The Office of the Governor and our office had a post-secondary education symposium in December where we brought Michael Crow in to talk about disruption, how we can look at doing things differently in post-secondary, how we can be not just more efficient, but how to be more effective in a time when we're not getting a lot of money coming into post-secondary from the state. This past month, Secretary Ramsey, Commissioner Lewis, myself, and the president of Kentucky State University took part in a symposium on the campus of Kentucky State, talking about what we need to do in a systematic way to focus on not getting our students ready for the world. And not just for the job world, but for the civic world, how to get them ready with the understanding that they need to actually add to society in a different way than even our generation did. So I thought that was a really good meeting, and it was packed once again. By the way, I should have said the Clay County, it was school day, so we had several districts that were going to bus in young people to talk with us, and they couldn't come, but I don't know where they would have put them because it was packed. It was standing room only. People are interested in what we're trying to do in this state around this conversation that we're having. The governor issued an executive order on January 7th with the KWIB forming a strategic, no, that's actually a whole nother, he did that later, but reconstituting SCOPE is what we know of it as, which is the Strategic Committee on Higher Education. And the way he reconstituted it was that he had our chair chairing all the chairs of post-secondary institutions around the state, including Kia, and I think you're a part of that too. I'm not sure, but if not, you may want to look at it because I think you are. Where we're talking about getting, where they're talking about how all of us can kind of address what needs to be addressed, and once again, a very systematic way. We also launched the Employability Outcome Initiative, where we are working with several community college programs and four-year programs with a third party that is looking at how we can put quote-unquote quality and measure quality when it comes to these employability outcomes into the infrastructure of our programs. Not just to have someone take a test that will tell you that you have the skills necessary to do it, but the only way we can do this is to have the kind of curriculum and pedagogy and other processes that are intertwined into the infrastructure of how we do business. So we're launching that. That will be about an 18-month project for this pilot project. If it works well, and we hope it will, then we're pushing to put it throughout our post-secondary institutions. And sir, I'm happy to take any questions that you folk may have, but that's my report. Thank you.
Dr. Thompson, I appreciate you focusing on the availability of post-secondary education for all in the state. And Secretary talked about that briefly also, that Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship that Kentucky has free of tuition and fees, a credential, an associate's degree in those 5 main areas where the most of the jobs are in the state. It's just free, regardless of your income. If you don't yet have an associate's degree, you can get it for free in Kentucky. Advanced manufacturing, construction trades, healthcare, business services, IT, exact distribution and logistics, but lots of areas, lots of career paths, all free.
Well, you know what? I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of the more exciting things that I think has happened in Kentucky in decades. I mean, because these big areas expand themselves, if you will, beyond what some people think are just the micro pieces of what we're trying to get accomplished. And it was amazing how many people that didn't know about this. So I think we're going to have to do a better job getting it out there. We're going to also have to do a better job in aligning our dual credit system with kids getting into post-secondary and getting that credential, or getting it while they're in high school. Quick anecdote, I had one student, high-performing student, that I had a chance to look at her post-secondary anyway, her hours that she took, transcript, I'll get it out sooner or later. And she had 36 hours of dual credit, but many of those did not align with the pathway. So we're going to have to do a better job with all of these available opportunities that will impact affordability, but it will also impact accountability and outcomes. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note and thank both of these gentlemen, the Secretary and President Thompson, for their partnership. We have identified a few key areas where we can absolutely have collaboration at deep levels. So one of the areas, Rich, in response to your question, that I talked a little bit about our partnering with educator preparation programs around teacher preparation. That's an area of deep interest for President Thompson as well. And so we've had some introductory meetings and are going to be thinking about how we can work together to continue to support educator preparation in our state. As well, in the pathways area, the President and the Secretary and I met with KCTCS just earlier this week in conversation about pathways and understanding that these career pathways aren't secondary pathways or post-secondary pathways, that it needs to be a single pathway, right? If your intent is to become a nurse, is to go into industrial maintenance, to become a welder, then you don't need a different pathway at the post-secondary level. And so I'm really proud of our team in the Office of Career and Technical Education and Student Transition in the work they've done in partnering with KCTCS to build those pathways across the secondary and post-secondary space. I'm also really pleased with really some of the forward-thinking work that KCTCS is doing in thinking about access to dual credit courses, particularly technical dual credit courses. The direction that they are moving now is to look at providing greater access to students, high school students, to those courses than ever before, and doing that across the 16 campuses. That's a major movement forward and work that we're all really excited about.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. All right, next we have an update on the Jefferson County Public Schools Corrective Action Plan. With us is Superintendent Marty Polio.
I don't know if it's working. Susan, you're just visiting. You're not supposed to be working.
All right, we got it working.
All right.
Great. Good morning. Pleasure to be in front of you again and talk about the work that we're doing in Jefferson County Public Schools. And as I start, we're really going to give you an update on our backpack work, because at our last meeting we were asked about summer learning, extended learning, and it really ties in well with the backpack and absolutely ties right into Commissioner Lewis's report on achievement gap and the work that has to take place. And if I may, I would recommend a book for you that was really fundamental to my development in really working on the achievement gap. Dr. Charles Payne's book, So Much Reform, So Little Change, which really documents 2 decades of work in the Chicago public schools with reform movements that didn't make a whole lot of change on achievement in students. And really the fundamental belief is that the culture of the school, the high expectations of the school, the collaborative work of adults, setting high expectations and providing deep, enriching learning experience for every single student, and being willing to meet every student where they are and provide those supports to them are what makes a difference. So I would encourage you to read that. It's something that really changed my perspective about 7 or 8 years ago on education, and is really fundamental to what we're doing around the backpack. Because we in our racial equity work, we have identified that we have a significant achievement gap that was very similar, if not slightly more than Wildcat Independent. And we know this is critical for our work moving forward, is to reduce this achievement gap and reduce disproportionality in many ways.
What was the name of that book again?
So Much Reform, So Little Change, Dr. Charles Payne. And so this is really tough, hard work that is going to take extensive commitment from all of our 7,000 teachers, 156 principals, and all of our central office as we move forward. But I think we have laid the groundwork of what is going to make a difference in the achievement gap, and I believe we've already started to see some of that. So we are doing this work, and I believe the backpack work is fundamental to it. And if you don't recall, the backpack work is really ensuring and guaranteeing that all 100,000 of our students are guaranteed effective instruction. We know where every student is, K through 12, so it is just like a staircase moving from K through 12. So unfortunately in education often we talk about kindergarten ready and then we talk about college ready. Clearly, there's a lot of steps in between. And so our work is to guarantee that every first grader at the end of first grade is where they need to be at the proper step in order to be on that pathway to college ready. With an intense focus on the 3 transition points: elementary to middle school to high school, and high school to college. Since we last saw you, and I told you that we're focusing on 2 specific aspects: one, ensuring that every single student has the literacy and numeracy skills they need to be successful. We know there's other academic skills, but a deep commitment to reading and math. Research is pretty clear on that need, and knowing where kids are and providing them intervention, and that's where our summer work comes in. And then secondly, what we call our success skills. Those skills like collaboration, innovation, communication, being a globally and culturally competent citizen, and persistent learning. Those are our success skills, and having students document those in their backpack with artifacts of learning. And where I believe the achievement gap where it's contributed to it is we have some students getting these deep, enriching experiences in the classroom and others that don't get them. And we have to eliminate that and ensure every student is getting what they need need to be successful. I told you last time we're going to have 21,000 students standing up in front of authentic panels giving defenses of their learning, of their readiness for the next step. So we have had students begin to do early defenses of their learning. Just so happened my daughter did hers yesterday. She's in 8th grade, and she stood in front of a panel and did her defense. She was not happy with me the night before that she had to prepare to do that. She blamed it on me. But it's powerful. It's powerful. She had a resume. She had her MAP scores. She had 20 artifacts of learning from the year. And that's powerful work that is happening to ensure that we meet kids where they are. So I did, if you'll indulge me, just a 2-minute video, a young lady who is a superstar. There is no doubt about it. I would not say that she's not a superstar. She is a student at Shelby Traditional Elementary. We brought her into central office to do her defense in front of our team, and I would just like you to just see a couple clips of her speaking about it.
I became a globally, culturally competent citizen by gaining understanding of how people that live in different areas around me got hit by Hurricane Katrina.
The backpack program, it's kind of, you get to talk about like how you accomplished these projects that you did with a group or anything, and it's actually really fun to talk about them, and it's actually really fun to work with groups at that.
My fall score for math was a 208. Area of strength, I think I'm good at multiplication, subtracting, dividing, and fractions.
When you think about, she's 10 years old, right? She's been on the planet 10 years. And when you see what she does, it is very impressive.
I was giving feedback to myself. I was like, well, Elise, I'm proud of you for like capitalizing those eyes, because it really shows a very other mature Elise.
So when they were asking questions, that was honestly the best part for me, because I like to answer people's questions, and I don't like to just like say, okay, this is my presentation, bye-bye. I like to answer their questions if they have any questions. So they don't go to like Dr. Carmen, for example. They don't go to Dr. Carmen and ask her questions about my defense, and she doesn't even know anything about it.
And I had to fix all of those mistakes. And words of wisdom I would give to people, like elementary, middle, or high, is never give up, keep pushing and pushing.
This is a way to make sure that all of our students are getting those authentic, meaningful experiences, that the things that we all kind of remember when we think about our very best learning experience. That's what we're going for all kids.
I just want to say thank you for being here. I really appreciate you guys coming to this presentation and watching me present. Thank you.
So you can see what a superstar she is, and has a very bright future. So we were real excited to show that, and we're going to have 21,000 students doing that in JCPS. We've already had a large number of them doing it. You could see that balance that she spoke about between success skills, those things like citizenship, persistence, but also you heard her talking about where she is in math and literacy and setting goals. And so we have had an intense focus on setting goals for our students based on their MAP scores. This is the first time we've done it. If you see, we're very proud of the data that we, at our winter assessment of MAP, and that's growth in reading and math. And pretty simply put, very raw way to say this is 50% growth means 1 year of learning for students. So if it's below 50%, that means our kids are falling behind. For us to catch up, they have to be above 50% in reading and math. So we were very proud. The green is 17-18 last year, our first year of implementation. You can see the difference in growth with reading and math from that fall to winter growth period, which means our students are catching up in literacy and math. We had schools that showed 70-75% growth. This is the kind of data that I think our backpack is supporting and making sure that we have goals. NWEA, the company that distributes MAP, they comment to us. Now, they might just be wanting to keep our business, but they said they have not seen a large urban school district with that kind of growth in their second year of implementation. We know this is only the halfway point. This is the 13.1 mile mark of a marathon. So we're not close to there yet. A lot of things happen in the second half of that marathon, but I believe it's evidence to show we're on the right track. And most importantly, and the reason I bring this up is because of our new Summer Backpack League. And essentially, our Backpack League is our work to identify 3rd through 6th graders who need additional support in the summertime for extended learning. And we are developing 4- and 5-week summer camps for students that is not just going to be go back to school and sit in the classroom. It is going to be engaging learning opportunities, as you see students outside, student working with robotics, students at zoos and things like that, working with animals, things that they would be passionate about, while at the same time having a focus certain parts of the day on literacy and numeracy, so that we can bridge that gap, that summer learning loss, and make sure we catch up those students that need it. So we are targeting about 5,000 total students in JCPS, 3rd through 6th grade, those experiences. We're doing 2 kinds. First of all, we have a lot of community organizations in the summer that run camps. We did not want to pull away from them, so we had them provide us with an application for us to give them a reading and a math teacher, where we will have the curriculum for them, 75 minutes of reading and math each day. And we are paying for that for those teachers in the camps. We have about 1,200 students in 22 community organizations that will be doing that. And then we will be doing some district-sponsored camps, too, where we will be engaging students in this learning. So we'll be reaching out to 5,000 with the intense goal of having at least 2,000 kids this summer spending 4 to 5 weeks in fun, engaging learning, enhancing that reading and math. So we're real excited about this work. We got a long way to go with the backpack to make sure it's authentic and not compliant in nature. And the most important thing we're doing is it's changing the type of instruction. So that's the real work that we have to do. Is it's not just about a kid collecting things or on the kid's shoulders. It's about our teachers, our personnel in schools, our leaders, ensuring that we are providing instruction and intervention in different ways for our students. So we continue to be excited about that work. As I move into the corrective action plan areas today, not as exciting as that, I know. We had this focus on early childhood and personnel management, 2 of the 10 areas that we talked about. Last time we talked about instructional management and CTE. Some of these, and these 2 specifically, and a couple others, are very long-term, difficult, challenging work that requires a complete restructuring of the way we do things. So some of these you'll hear about how we have to do things and completely restructure. We're in the process of doing it, but it's difficult, hard work. It's, in essence, turning around a battleship. But we know we've got to take steps and do it each and every day, make big-time structural changes in order to support the work around this corrective action plan. Our overall work on the corrective action plan, as you can see, 18% of our actions are established. The other 82% are developing, and you can see the numbers in each area that we have work to do on each one. You know, the 3 or 4 that have the most: operations, finance, CTE, and then IDEA are the ones with the significant work that has to take place. And then the update from December to February, we increased that percent by 5%. On our actions that are established, and you can see within each area where we grew. We'll continue to report this way over the next year and a half, so you see our growth as we move forward. The 2 areas that I'm going to touch on: early childhood. So last year, well documented our issues with Head Start. And our work in early childhood. So a big issue for us moving forward is that we partner with the new Head Start or Head Start agencies so we can expand services to pre-K and early childhood throughout JCPS. We know that's important for success of our students. And so that's going to be an important work. Our real focus is going to be 3- and 4-year-olds to make sure that they are kindergarten ready and have an intense focus on that kindergarten readiness. Have things like camps where we implement kindergarten readiness camps. We're refining our procedures in everything we do with early childhood, facilities, health, safety, and student information. And then we're really working on collaborating with KDE on walkthroughs. So one of the things that has happened as a result of our work in early childhood, they are no longer just a classroom stuck in an elementary school. We are intensely focusing on the instruction that takes place in there, the supports that take place in early childhood, and quite frankly, moving to early childhood centers as much as we possibly can. We can provide the supports and resources that are needed. So as you can see, our update, 5 CAP actions for developing. 1 is established. The established is KDE visiting our meetings on a regular basis in early childhood to provide support. Our outcome data right now, about 52.5% of our students were kindergarten ready. Those that go to our kindergarten ready camps, that are in the state-funded preschool, 60.5, so evidence to show that that's effective, and our kindergarten readiness camp was 71%. You can see the amount of walkthroughs and professional development that we have provided this year, which is exponentially higher than what we've done in years past. So we think that is turning the type of instruction that we provide with our early childhood classrooms. And then second of all is personnel management. Human resources has been a big issue in JCPS for many years that we have to really work to improve. We have shortages in many areas. Teacher shortage is one that we continue to work on. We continue to have vacancies, although that has decreased. So we're going to have to do some innovative things. We are in the process of looking to restructure HR completely to provide better support to schools. So that doesn't happen. We are looking to partner with universities to increase our teacher candidates in innovative ways, in teacher residency programs, and specifically to increase our minority teacher percentage in our district that fits well with our racial equity plan. We are really, what we have not done in this district in many years is have an effective leadership development model. We have essentially decided that we're really hoping that we hire principals and they are ready for the job. I think we all know often assistant principal is not necessarily a role that prepares you for principal, and so we have to have an effective leadership training program that is going to have principals ready. We are effectively and going to aggressively work to reduce our central office expenditures over the next 10 years. We think that we can repurpose over $100 million to our schools over a decade to come. We believe we can do that. We're going to have to take an assertive approach to that. But that is where we are going to have to make aggressive cuts, is in central office, in order to fund supports and programs in our school. We're committed to doing that. That's going to take time. It's not an overnight solution, but it is something that we are intensely focused on, and really increasing our communication, two-way communication between HR and schools. So you see the 16 CAP actions for developing. 2 are established. The 2 that we've established are scheduling time outside of the school day for our school-based employees to communicate with central office. And then really monitor our employee files for accuracy and make sure everyone are doing things like mid-year feedback with teachers and central office employees, and making sure that we have a real continuous growth model with our employees. And finally, you can see we've established leadership development cohorts, rising. One, we are identifying to become principals, assistant principals, teacher leaders. We are really working to develop leaders within JCPS. We were proud that since we've passed our racial equity plan, that 50% of all administrators hired in the district are people of color, and we think that is a huge gain for us. We really have to work on the teacher side of it. That's going to be, we've seen a gain, but at a much slower rate. We have racial equity institutes that our certified staff are really working through. We're reviewing all of our job descriptions, and as you can see, we reviewed over 800 employee files, the desk audits, to make sure that we're doing this correctly. So a lot of these actions are deep on changing the way we do things, and some of them are compliant, but we think we're moving forward with this tough, difficult work to make for a better district. So I'll take any questions you have at this time.
Ben?
What does your summer backpack program cost?
Not cost the district?
Right.
So for the students, it would be free. We are estimating anywhere with transportation and food, anywhere probably in the range of $2 million is what we're expecting.
You have 5,000 students roughly in that.
We're identifying 5,000, and our goal is to get 1,500 to 2,000 that are there every single day.
On that topic, Superintendent, hear from teachers all the time that students in certain groups, there's a huge summer slide, right? Living in kind of an academic desert, that this would seem to would take head on. We'd be real interested, I'd be interested, from hearing from teachers and researchers about that difficulty that the students that participate in this, I don't know if there's some way that you will measure the difference between the students that participate and don't participate in this program. If you do measure, I think I'd be very interested in how that turned out, and interested how you will measure that at the end of the summer.
That's a great question. We assess on MAP. Now, we don't, once again, I don't want to make this a drudgery come to school in the summer. We struggle with attendance as it is. We have an attendance campaign where we really have to really focus on getting our kids to school more often and reducing chronically absent students. So we don't want to make it that.
Right.
However, we do believe we will give a MAP assessment at the end of the year, right before students leave, to find that exactly where they are. And then when they finish that camp, we'll provide that assessment again, and hopefully see that what we'll find is that students have moved forward on their MAP and become closer to on grade level in both math and reading. But we'd be happy to provide that data after our first round.
Yeah. Other questions? Rich?
Dr. Pullier, you remember 4 years ago, Adam Edlin said Jefferson County was the most bloated, top-heavy district of any large urban district he studied, spending more on administration, less on instruction than any other district he studied. You've indicated you have $100 million in central office expense that you can repurpose to instruction. Why is that going to take 10 years?
It might not necessarily just take 10 years, but we have several areas that we are going to have to cut and impact, which include the amount of days that work, our pay scale and how it increases.
I understand that, but why is it going to take 10 years to fix it?
So, we do have some challenges when it comes to reducing grades and days of people when it comes to state law around that. It can be challenging at times. But we think we're going to make aggressive cuts this year. We are going to do that. And so over a course of 10 years is where, and I think it could be much higher than that number. I think I'm being very conservative at this time. But there are some factors that come into play around making those decisions with statute.
The statute?
Yeah, really. I'd like to know what they are.
Milton?
Last year, I believe y'all had like 148 teachers that y'all needed when school started. And I think eventually you got that number down to around 48. So far, have all classrooms got teachers now for this school year?
So right now, and this isn't the exact number, we reviewed it about 2 weeks ago. We started the year, I think, with about 175 vacancies, and we're down to about 49 teacher vacancies right now. So we still do have some. We have some transition at the middle of the year that caused some vacancies. We filled those vacancies, but we are aggressively working to fill them as we speak. So out of 7,000 right now, we have 49 vacancies. Our goal is to get to 0 without a doubt. This is an issue that I think many districts around America are struggling with right now. That we've really got to look to innovative ways for certification, to support new teachers. So we're working on that, making sure we support new teachers so we retain them and don't lose them. But it's a tough job. I mean, there is no doubt. I have more respect for teachers than any other profession in the world. But we're going to have to do some things to make sure aggressively, and that's a big part of our restructuring of HR, is to provide that intense support for schools. But right now it's about 49.
In Jefferson County, how many teachers every year that y'all have to replace or turn about?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I can provide you that. I'd hate to give you a number right now. Our retention is higher than the national average, I will say that. I know our retention is higher than the national average, but I'd hate to give you a number and that not be what it is. So I'd be happy to provide that number for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note as well, Dr. Polio mentioned that there are some barriers in statute to some of the reorganization that he may need to do. We understand those barriers, and we are supportive of change, whatever change in statute would be necessary in order for the superintendent in Jefferson County or any other superintendent to be able to make personnel changes needed to reorganize central office, particularly with administrative positions. One of the priorities of this board, that this board adopted, was supporting legislation that empowers superintendents and district leaders to have greater discretion, including in the area of personnel management. And so we've been in conversation with Dr. Polio, and we will continue to be supportive of those efforts in the General Assembly.
And I want to say, Dr. Lewis, the belief that central office people in JCPS are not working hard is not accurate. So we do have to make cuts, but there, at central office in JCPS, dedicated people that are working extremely hard for kids, that are committed to kids. So I just want to say that, but we do have some real structural things that we have to change.
Dr. Thompson?
Yes, I mean, first of all, good to hear about the summer programs. We know the importance of these bridge programs and the effects it can have on gaps, once again. But they've also been shown to have a huge effect on the social, emotional, and cultural elements of these kids, making sure that they are well prepared to exist within, in many cases, classrooms that weren't fully designed for them. Are you taking any of those measures into account in selection and in evaluation?
As far as students who are identified that need support? Yes, I mean, we are really working to identify all of our students who are not where they need to be. But we are really depending upon our elementary schools to identify students in many areas that need additional supports. That's one of our areas of focus for our schools, is providing more supports for them. And so we'll be taking to our Board of Education next Tuesday night a job description around mental health professionals for every single of our, all of our schools. So we know right now that, and Dr. Lewis talked about some of those issues that come from outside, that anywhere from a fifth to a quarter of our students have untreated mental health needs. They have medical needs, we have social needs, but we've got to provide those. We are going to do that. So that will be another layer of how we will identify students who we can keep engaged in our summer program and really stop that summer slide. So yes, a big part of this is both the success skill side of it and that academic side of it, and that success skill side of it is really where we're identifying those kids. But I don't want to shy away from the fact that our goal will be to identify students who are not where they need to be in reading and math, get them engaged and provide them that support, so when they come back in August, they are closer to being on grade level, if not on grade level, than they were before.
Kathy?
Is it possible, Commissioner, that we could find out what, or maybe you could help, what are the particular statutes that would be a barrier to a reorg?
So I'll give you one specifically, and it involves what we would generally call as administrative tenure, which in some ways limits superintendents' ability to move administrators potentially back to instructional responsibilities. I believe if an administrator has 2 years, 2 or more years of experience, then it becomes a challenge if a superintendent believes there's a need for financial reasons or for other reasons to move an administrator to a different type of position.
By statute?
By statute. It's a combination of statute and, quite frankly, the court's interpretation of the statute, because there was some debate about the interpretation of the statute. I think it was within the last year. The courts have given their interpretation. The question was whether or not the 2-year period of an administrator in a position meant 2 years in that district or that position, or 2 years, period, as an administrator. And the court's interpretation has been that it is 2 years as an administrator in Kentucky.
Is that the single biggest barrier you think you
Yes,
face?
it is.
Financially?
Yes, it is. So it doesn't mean that we can't do it. It becomes more of, there's just more steps involved and more things that have to happen, which make it more challenging.
Okay.
So it's just not as, the restructure is not as direct or the way that you might hear about it in the business world, I guess is the best way to put it.
Clearly. And so, other than that, I would, and maybe not now, but I would be very interested to know, as you go through this process, what barriers you do have to saving money and repurposing. I cannot imagine that there isn't a taxpayer or a parent in this Commonwealth that wouldn't love to see you do this. I mean, $100 million or more going to teachers and students in this day and age, with money being as difficult as it is to get, I think it could be an example for maybe all of the school districts who are trying to sharpen their pencils to see what we could do to save money. So I'm very
Thank you. I appreciate that. And what we grapple with every day. I mean, these are tough calls, but an example of this would be our backpack work. We have schools that are they ask us every day, because of this work, we need better technology and our kids to have more access to technology. I'm a believer in just handing kid technology and saying everyone's one-to-one is not necessarily impactful unless you change the type of instruction that takes place with that. And so we have the backpack that will do that. And for us to get where kids have that technology, we need to set aside $7 million a year to change that, because the paradigm of kids going to a computer lab is not effective in this day and age. Teachers have to be willing to access it immediately, not reserve a computer lab 2 weeks from now and take their class down there, and it has to be on a daily basis throughout the class period. So, you know, we have to make tough calls where we say what's the most important. The most important is getting kids that technology so that they can implement this initiative around the backpack effectively, and that means tough decisions for us. So that's what we're willing to do.
I could just make a comment if I could, sir. Yes, Dr. Polley, I just want to commend you. There was a program that Commissioner Lewis and I were just at Ballard High School some weeks ago. I want to commend you for your embracing and commitment to apprentice, and also understanding if there's going to be a successful apprentice, you have to have businesses involved. And I think you had 100 businesses from around the cities that are engaged. Just want to commend you in your efforts.
Yeah, thank you. And what we became at that event was JCPS actually became an apprentice provider. And so we've been asking businesses to provide apprenticeships for students And we had to look internally and say, look at all the different industry sectors that we support within our operation, from early childhood to nutrition services to transportation. Why would we also not hire students in pathways for apprenticeships? And so we've begun that, and one of the only districts I know to do that. And so we just want to increase that and be partners with our business partners doing this work.
Right. And if I remember correctly, I think you have 10.
That's correct.
And you're looking to add 3 more.
Yeah, 10 industry sectors right now that we're hiring students, and we want to continue to do that.
Keep it going.
Thank you.
Great.
Superintendent, thank you for your report.
Thank you all for your time.
Really appreciate you. All right, moving on to certainly one of the highlights of this board meeting is the Spotlight in Innovation. And today we have Boyle County Schools here. If you'd please join us at the table. And I'll be hearing about gap reduction strategy. Sort of. Sounds like it lines up with our commissioner's report today. So anxious to hear.
A lot of us.
Fill up the whole thing.
I think you all were the reason I couldn't get in one of the elevators, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
I'm teasing. Welcome.
Thank you.
But if you
Y'all hear us, or?
And the floor is yours. Please pull those microphones up as you speak so everyone can hear. Would also ask that you begin by introducing who's at the table would help us.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Jane Painter. I'm the Special Education Director for Boyle County Schools. And with me today, first of all, I want to say thank you all for having us. We really appreciate you all allowing us to come and talk about our gap reduction model. But I have David Young, our Assistant Superintendent, Jennifer Pearson, Assistant Principal at Woodlawn Elementary, Bobby LaFew, Assistant Principal at Junction City Elementary, Kristen Moore is a regular education teacher at Junction City, Chelsea Clark is a regular education teacher at Woodlawn, Jane Goatley is a special education teacher at Woodlawn, and then finally Lisa Brown is a special education teacher at Junction City. We also brought our superintendent, Michael Favors, and our board chairperson, Jennifer Newby, and we appreciate their support too. So I'll begin by giving you a little bit of information about our district. We're in Danville, Kentucky. We have 5 schools. We have 3 elementary schools, Woodlawn Elementary, Junction City Elementary, Perryville Elementary, and then Boyle County Middle School and Boyle County High School. We have about 2,700 students, and we're about a 50% free and reduced lunch rate. So one thing about our co-teaching model, we really believe it's a shared learning approach. And so that's where our acronym came in, of shared learning. So systematically helping achieve rigorous engagement daily. And initially, when we began looking at how we could reduce gaps, we kind of struggled with this for years. But one of the major things that we really focused on was student engagement. We really felt like that our students weren't engaged enough in the classroom, and we were having students we had situations where we were maybe creating more gaps by not having engagement. So in order to increase our student engagement, one of the things that we did was, we really started looking at how we placed students. And so we placed all of our students that struggle in reading and math. We flexibly placed them in the same room at the same time. And we did that regardless of their individual education plan status. All of our special education staff, certified and classified, were assigned to the shared learning classrooms. So that meant we placed 2 or 3 adults in every classroom. We had to make a commitment to doing that. And then our teaching occurs in 1 of 2 models. We use a station teaching model, which our teachers will explain a little more in a few minutes, and we use a chunking model. But we really felt like those were the 2 ways that we were going to be able to see the most results, and we have seen the most results. A major piece to this, to us being able to close our gap, has been commitment from our teachers and our administrators. And if we had not had that, or don't continue to have that, we're not going to continue to do what we're doing. So.
Very good. So I guess sort of beginning with the end in mind, we want to, before we tell you, before we give you all the nuts and bolts, we want to tell you some of the results that we've seen in the 5 or 6 years that we've been implementing shared learning. The first thing you heard Jane mention, engagement. And in a shared learning classroom, you truly do see that engagement is just eliminated as a variable or as a barrier. The students are engaged during the entire during the entire time that the lesson's happening. And so you can imagine if engagement's higher, achievement also becomes higher, and classroom disruptions become lower. And so we've seen that play out in classroom after classroom, school after school. The second result we've noticed is that it has made our teachers more efficient in their planning and in their design of assessments. As Jane mentioned, you're going to hear about the station teaching model and the chunking model, and the teachers are going to tell you everything that goes into that. But regardless of the model, the teachers have to break their lessons into bite-sized pieces of content that are easier for the students to digest. And then they also have to build assessments to happen right after each one of those pieces of content is taught. And so it's made them more efficient. The third thing that we've noticed is that it leads to our maximizing our staff talent better. You know, back before we started shared learning, you could have gone into any classroom in our district and you would have seen a classroom of maybe 25 students. You would have had a general education teacher at the front of the room. There might have been 3, 4, 5 students with IEPs who are in the room. They would have been sitting in with the rest of the 25 students. There might have been a special education teacher sitting near them, and she might have been, you know, tapping on their desk, making sure that they're paying attention, maybe helping them take notes, maybe paraphrasing, which are all good things to do. But in our classrooms now, what you see is those same special education teachers, they're still providing those supports, but they're teaching all day. They have a small group of 6, 7, 8 students around them, and they're teaching content in addition to providing those supports. So we're utilizing our human resources better. And then the last thing that I'll mention, maybe the most impactful to me, if you're a student who struggles in reading and math, you know, chances are school hasn't been a great experience for you. But if you come to our school district, those same students who struggle in reading and math get 100% of their instruction in reading and math all day long in a safe, small, comfortable group of 6, 7, 8 other students and a teacher. And then, like I mentioned before, they're getting the lesson in little bite-sized chunks that are easily assessed by the teacher in real time. And so we see, you know, in that way, it has completely changed the student experience and the way that they view education. And I think that's been a huge impact. The last bullet on the screen talks about data, and I'll mention the data we brought to you today is K-Prep data for the past 5 years for our students with disabilities. But before I show you that data, I'll let you know we could have brought data from any subgroup. We could have brought it from our economically disadvantaged students. We could have also brought you any set of data. We could have brought you ACT data, MAP data, DRA data from our elementary schools. It all shows the same trend, which is a major reduction of novice and a major increase of students who score proficient. And so if we go to the next slide. You can see there on the left, those are, and I'll give you just a second to kind of acclimate to the graph. Elementary reading, if you look at the bottom, the sort of peach or pink color at the bottom is our percentage of novice. Yellow is apprentice. The sort of olive green is proficient. And then at the top, the more Kelly green is distinguished. Then you can see we go from 2013-14 all the way over to this past year. And you can clearly see that trend of novice reduction and increase in proficiency. Some of those decreases in novice are anywhere from 10, 15, 20% decreases in novice over that time. And then, as you can see, the way the graph what the graph shows there is also equal increases in proficient. You can see the state data over on the side that's remained relatively consistent over that same time period. Our next slide shows elementary math. And you can see that same trend, the decrease in novice. It's a little bit more pronounced in math even than it is in reading, and you can see the increase in proficient. And then at the side you can see the state data as well. And then, today's presentation is about elementary schools, but we do shared learning across all of our schools, and our middle schools and high schools as well. So we brought some middle school data today just to show you that trend continues as the kids get older. So you can see there, middle school on the left, reading in Boyle County, you can see that same trend. And then in middle school math, it's maybe the most impressive of all the data. If you look at how small that novice percentage in the past 2 years has been in the single digits, and so we're very proud of that. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Pearson and Mr. Lefew, who are to give you a little bit of a look into what's important with shared learning as a building administrator.
I know we get to follow all the exciting data, but we get to talk more about how we as administrators, as we bring the shared learning model down, how do we create the culture in our buildings? And I think that is a key component. Teachers right here, this is how it gets done. And so we, as the administration in the building, what are we doing that is creating that culture that's maximizing that engagement for our kids and providing the success for our kids? So we're going to briefly talk from our role. We kind of focus on two ways that we help create the structure that works for them, that brings that success to our kids. And we focus on how we create our schedules and how we create planning for our teachers so that we really do have truly shared responsibility with teachers in our classrooms. And then we also set it up and take a lot of time thinking about how we create relationships. How do we make this work for our students and for our teachers? We know this gap, and we'll talk about this, but the gap population, these kids become kids that are disconnected often as they go through school. And so how do we keep that connection? By creating those relationships. So those are the two parts that we facilitate as administrators to bring that optimal engagement for them. All right, Bobby's going to talk a little bit about the scheduling part.
Basically, from this slide, you have 3 key points. You must schedule all your students who have IEPs and or struggling in math and reading first. If you let any other student, deficits stray from this, you will not be getting all the parts of shared learning. Along with scheduling, you must ensure that all your teachers have common planning at least once a week. All right, and then we group our students homogeneous grouping in reading maths for most of the day. But with that being said, we also keep them where they're heterogeneously throughout the day, also in classes like reading and not reading, science and social studies, and even any elective classes. Finally, our goal as administrators is to ensure that our teachers are honoring our master schedule and their daily schedule. Being on time is extremely important when the lesson structure depends on it. Also, we try to give our teachers detailed feedback on a regular basis as much as possible. There's a packet I think we sent up here that you'll see that we have a walkthrough form that we as administrators use to give us guidelines, but also allows the teachers to see what we're coming in the rooms and looking for and making sure that this is getting done on a regular basis. And now I'll turn it back over to Ms. Pearson.
All right, so the other component that I think is key to this is building those relationships and laying the foundations. That's where it's going to really work and move forward. This begins with pairing our classroom teachers with special education teachers very intentionally. It takes buy-in from teachers to share that classroom equally and share those responsibilities equally. Special ed teachers, I think of in the past where I used to walk in schools and, there was either a resource room or, like Mr. Mr. Young referred to the tapping on the desk. You walk into these rooms, and it is a shared responsibility with these teachers. So that really begins with pairing well, thinking about how we use our teachers' strengths to create content specialists that provide that best learning environment. And that's important for us as we look at that, to really cultivate those talents within our building and putting people where they're talented. That's efficiently using, I think, our human resources. And then the last piece is that connectedness, and that's a term in our district we've been using a lot in the last year or two. We know with this GAP population that these kids often, again, become disconnected as school goes more and more through. And when we create these shared learning experiences within our classrooms, we're giving these students opportunities to have multiple connections, not just with multiple teachers, but with their peers. And you see that. There is no checking out in these classrooms. They are fully engaged. And it's really neat to walk in and to be able to see that. These are kids that years ago, honestly, I taught for years and have also walked into classrooms for years, that these would have been kids that would have been through the cracks, slipping in that back, not engaging with their peers comfortably, and certainly not engaging with their teachers comfortably. And the way the models work that our teachers do so amazingly well brings that engagement and that connectedness to our students in a way that I think raises the rigor and has that engagement level at a level that's just optimal for everyone. So those two parts for us are important, to take the vision the district's laid out, then for us to create the culture in our building, and then it moves naturally to the real players in this, which are our amazing teachers.
Okay, next we'll talk about the teacher's role in shared learning. The shared learning essentials are shared everything, rooted in the standards and daily data. First, shared responsibility of the classroom and every student, and this really means shared everything. So it is essential that the teachers have the same planning time. During planning, teachers will discuss student progress from that particular day. They will make lesson plans, talk about next steps in teaching, gather resources for lessons, grade assignments, look over any student data that's necessary to look at. Teachers also have equal responsibility in contacting parents and holding parent conferences. A shared learning classroom is a true partnership for the teachers. When someone walks into a classroom, they should not be able to tell who is the regular education teacher and who is the special education teacher. It should look seamless. And now I will turn it over to Chelsea to talk about the standards.
Thank you. So we're going to talk, one of the most important things that we have seen is to be rooted in the standards. And just as has been addressed throughout the meeting today, is having a set of common high expectations for all students. Because one negative thing that can happen when you put all of the struggling learners in one room is for those expectations to diminish. But that does not happen with the shared learning model. So the teachers become content experts through deconstructing of the standards and developing district-wide assessments. So what that means is that, and I've been teaching for 5 years, and every year in the summer, I have met with all of the teachers in my district who teach my grade level, including special education teachers. And we come together to design assessments that are directly congruent to the Kentucky Academic Core Standards. And what this does is it ensures that every student in our district, in my grade level and my subject, is held to the same expectation. So these students are going to be taking assessments throughout their school career, and those assessments are not going to be modified. Every student takes the same K-Prep test. They receive their accommodations, but it's our job to prepare them at grade level for the assessments that they will be facing. And so the the shared learning model really helps us do that. And so then we take all of the assessments that have been created, and those go to the district level, and they again ensure that we are congruent with those Kentucky Academic Core Standards. And this bullet is my favorite, and it's really what makes shared learning such as successful as it has been for us. It's that the differentiation happens in the process, not the product. So every student is taking the same assessment and is held to the same expectations. And I will say, I see success in every classroom that I have. You can come into my classrooms, and other than the fact of having that special education teacher, you may not have been able to tell which of my classes is the shared learning classroom. So that's something that I'm really proud of. So another important aspect of the shared learning model is data collection, and that's really important in education in general today. But it allows you to just really create that cohesion between the teachers, and it allows us to assess those students every single day and make sure that we are differentiating them and meeting them where they are and taking them to the level of the standard or target that day. So we collect data weekly and daily. Some examples include daily exit slips, flashbacks, summative assessments, running records, DRAs, and MAP. And one of the things that the data does for us is helps us to create those flexible student groups. So, and that's another thing that does increase the connectedness, as Ms. Pearson was talking about, because the students are, they'll be with different students, every unit or every other week. They get to really have a nice mix of mixing with their peers. So that also helps with that connectedness piece. So now I'll turn it over to Jane to tell you more about station teaching.
Thank you, Chelsea. I'm going to be discussing one of our shared learning models, which is our station teaching model. We think this model is great. I love it. It maximizes human resources and our material resources during the day, which we feel like leads to optimal learning environment for students. Like has been said before, I'm a special education teacher. We use this model pretty much daily, every day in the classroom. With what I'm going to be discussing, know that this can be adapted and tweaked a little bit depending on the specific needs of an individual classroom, but for the most part, this is what it's going to look like in our school district. To begin, students are going to be placed into 3 groups. For today's purpose, we'll say a high, middle, and a low group based on academic performance, but teachers will give names to these groups, such as in elementary school fashion, the red team, the blue team, and the yellow team, just so they can be more easily identified, given directions throughout the day. We see that students working within these small groups in the station teaching model benefit because of the heightened engagement. Also, accountability increases immensely with this style of teaching. Another benefit that has already been discussed is the positive connections that the students are able to make with multiple adults during the day. And with this increased rapport, we have seen a decrease in interruptions during academic times and behavior incidents. So at a functional level, as you can see on the screen behind you, there are at least 2 and possibly 3 adults during the station teaching. You have a regular education teacher leading a station, your special education teacher leading a station, and either if you're fortunate enough to have a level 2 certified IA, we love those in Bull County. Having those certified adults that are able to help lead stations but maybe just don't have a teaching job yet, we really try to utilize those staff members in our shared learning model. So they might be leading in a station, or this might be an independent station where students are working without an adult but have pointed tasks. So beginning at Station 1, the regular education teacher will teach the core lesson. This is a lesson that all students in the class receive that matches the learning target for the day. In this model, the high group will start with the regular education teacher, followed by the low group, and then the middle group. We are very intentional with our rotations of our groups, so we really want the general education teacher to start with that high group, then the low group, and then the middle group. The second station is where the special education teacher will be leading. The special education teacher will start with the low group, and you're working on prerequisite skills with students here, really filling in those gaps and trying to close those skill needs that those students have, and you're preparing them to receive the core lesson from the regular education teacher. So this is where we find a lot of success, really helping those struggling learners kind of close gaps. So the special education teacher will start with the low group. Next, the middle group will come to this station, and this can also be a prerequisite skill time for those students, or it might be an extension of the learning. And then lastly, the high group will come to the station, and this is an extension or enrichment of the core lesson where we can really deepen understanding and learning. At Station 3, students will be working with your instructional assistant, or it might be an independent station. Here they're working on a flashback using technology resources, or it might be a spiral review. So how does this work with time? The timing of stations really depends on the amount of time that you have during the school day, but we found that it ends up being approximately 15 minutes per station. So one teacher will set a timer, you train your students. After the 15-minute station's up, the timer sounds, students know to stand up and quietly rotate, and it becomes a smooth system after like 2 days. So this is great. It's crucial, however, that teachers stay on schedule. You have to know when to stop and start the timer and time to move on. And at the end of the station time, after all the students have rotated to all 3 stations, the class will take an exit slip together. So this teaching style requires a lot of preparation, but it's proven to be very effective, and the students love it. They are extremely engaged, the behavior incidents are down, and it has been extremely successful. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to talk about another model in our shared learning system.
Thank you, Jane. This is a model that I use as a regular education teacher, as well as a model that I'm currently using as a special education teacher. This model begins with a whole group lesson, referred to as Content Chunk 1 on the presentation. This is a mini lesson that takes no more than 10 minutes. The teacher will introduce the learning target of the day during this time and keep the lesson short so students continue to be engaged and active during this lesson time. Students will then break into small groups where the teachers can check for understanding and students can practice the skill that they have learned during the chunk. The small groups are led by the general education teacher, the special education teacher, and an instructional assistant when available, or an independent station as referred to in the last model. Small groups allow students to be active learners, increase their student engagement, and it allows for more individualized instruction. Students will then return to the whole group area where the teacher is able to correct any misconceptions that they noted during the small group time, and they're able to deliver the second chunk of the lesson. This again will be no more than 10 minutes, and it will be directly correlated with the learning target of the day. After this time, the students will break into small groups again, where they will continue to practice the skill. During this time, the teachers are able to reteach, provide more practice, or enrich students depending on their understanding of the skill that has been taught. Each small group is differentiated to best meet the needs of the students in that group. So when you are looking at the groups, the instruction might look different, but we have the same goal, which is mastery of the learning target. At the end of these small groups, students will then take their exit slip for the day. This formative data will be used by teachers to drive instruction for the next day. In order to maximize success of this model, teachers must make time to plan together during their common planning as well as after school, and they have to reflect on their data daily to drive instruction. Thank you so much.
Okay. Do you all have any questions about our model? I think our teachers tried to explain it well, but if you've got any questions, we're happy to entertain those.
I had one question. The data that you displayed, want to make sure I understand that. The data is for students on IEPs?
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
But the beauty of the model is that it impacts students that have disabilities. It also impacts students that are economically disadvantaged. It really impacts any student who struggles in reading and math. We also have students that have IEPs that aren't in shared learning classrooms.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
First, thank you all for agreeing to come and do this. One of the reasons I wanted these folks to come, Mr. Chair, is I had the opportunity to visit with Boyle County Superintendent LaFavors and his leadership team maybe about a couple months ago now. Yeah. And there's no more I think, driven and innovative leadership team in the state than what they have in Boyle County. What I think you have here in this example is an example of a district that has, one, taken a look at the challenges of gaps and made a commitment to doing something about it, not ignoring it, not minimizing it, not thinking about how we can game the system, but thinking how can we serve each and every kid. And what they've laid out isn't a gimmick, It's not a, something that kind of fly-by-night thing that you put in place and we're going to close gaps. What they've played out is an approach to fundamentally changing how teaching and learning works in the district. And you can see it. I think they've done a great job of explaining it. I think it's even more powerful to see it in place. This is the new way that they do business. And as the data shows, they're getting results. So I want to thank you guys. Thank you, Superintendent LaFavors and your team. Thank the teachers who are on the ground making this happen every single day, the building leaders. Thank you guys for what you're doing, and please continue.
I just had a comment, Chair. First, as a mother of a child who's been told on more than one occasion, some days all I feel like I do is teach Jay, I would imagine that having taken your struggling learners and kind of focus that attention on them, I would imagine you've seen also additional success with your students not on IEPs because they have more attention devoted to them.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
fantastic.
fantastic.
This is my 25th year as special ed director in our district, and I've seen our kids change over the past 5 to 7 years since we've started this model. I said to David the other day, we're educating and we're graduating successful special needs students. And I'm not saying we didn't do that before, but we are truly making a difference, and they're people that can go on and go to college if that's what they so choose to do, or do post-secondary. They have goals, and it's changed the way our kids approach school and approach life.
How long have you all had this shared model in operation?
It's about our 7th or 8th year, I think.
Have you seen any students improve to the extent that they can exit the program?
We are actually. That's a goal kind of on our radar in the last year to two, that we're tracking our students that we are able to exit, and we are looking at that. We have had students that we're able to reduce supports for, maybe not necessarily exit the program, but we are able to reduce the supports and the accommodations that are needed to be given to them.
Pretty impressive results here.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Kathy?
I have a question for you about the walkthrough, which was only lightly touched on, and I, looked at some of the documents that you have. What is the purpose of it, and is the paperwork cumbersome, or how, if you could go through that?
Yeah, sure. It's really not cumbersome. I mean, our district is used to walkthroughs. Our teachers are used to them. Our administrators do a ton. We do a lot from the district level. So it's really quick. We go in and we can get a 10 to 15 minute snapshot in each classroom. We typically try and give positive feedback on those walkthroughs, but then we'll have a wrap-up session with our principals and talk through if we see things that need to be worked on, or those kinds of things. And it's I think the one thing about it is if we do see things that aren't going quite right, we try and correct them. We hit on the fact that planning is huge, and you have to see evidence of planning, and that for me is the one thing that I think you can tell when you go in a classroom if people haven't planned well. That the walkthrough shows you that immediately.
How often do you do them, and how do the teachers respond?
We do.
I was going to say, the teachers are used to them. I mean, it's just a normal part of our culture in our school. I would say I try to do sometimes 2 a day even as a goal for myself. It's a great way to keep connected to what's going on, what they need. It's a great way to coach. It's a great way to see things in classrooms and then say, oh, I just saw this. This is a great thing you might want to try. It's another way that I think we're connected and really involved within the classroom daily activities, not separated in an office doing paperwork. And the paperwork's not cumbersome. It's quick to do that. We can give it back to them digitally. It just doesn't take any time, but it's a way to keep part of what's going on in our building, to not be in a separate place somewhere, coming up with great ideas in your head. This is a way to see those great ideas, but also know what it looks like and what's really happening and what's working. But I would say our teachers, do you all, you don't mind walkthroughs, you're used to
No,
it.
it feels like about every 2 weeks. We had one on Monday. But we know that there's going to be either a building administrator or a district administrator in the building. We expect them, and you're always prepared, but it's what you should be doing anyway. So I think that's kind of the mindset that we have at this point.
And it shows that they care. You know, I appreciate it. If I'm going to be giving 110% effort every day, I want them to come and see that. You know, I just like our students like to be recognized positively. I like that too. You know, and Mr. Young came in my room this week actually, and he hadn't been in my room in a couple years, and I was missing him. I was like, you know, see what I'm doing? Of course, the principals are there, and other district employees are, but yes, Mr. LaFavors, he came in my room on the first day of my very first year, so I'll say that. I'll never forget that. So it's just part of our culture, and we really appreciate it, honestly.
Thank you.
Lisa.
This is very exciting, and so thank you all for being here and for sharing it, and keep up the great work. Question, if other schools wanted to model this, what's involved from a funding or restructuring, or how did you all pull it together? Because obviously, it probably has more staffing than the traditional models.
I don't know that it has more staffing than a traditional model. We had to reallocate our thoughts on things. Now, one of the things that we did do is we looked at our instructional assistants that we had across the district, and they play a great role, but we started changing our focus to where we wanted to hire more what we call level 2 IAs, and those are certified teachers that maybe haven't found a job or or those kinds of things that we can utilize, and they have had teaching models and they have gone through methods and that kind of stuff, so they are teachers. And then we reallocated our instructional assistants to our more needy populations, our FMD population and that. So that was really the major change that we took. But it really doesn't take, when you plan and you allocate your staff appropriately and you schedule the way we schedule, you really don't, it doesn't require much more staff than
That's exciting. Because usually what we hear is we need more money, more money,
Well,
more
now,
money.
people might think that when you first look at it or you first talk about it, that's not something that we, if you spread the kids out, yes, but and we're not saying we don't, that we do have flexible grouping. They're not all in the same class all day long, but you do have to be thoughtful about placement of students.
One of the interesting things I'll add to that, a couple of our schools value this model to the extent that they have added staff from their Section 6 budget, which is separate from special education. They have added staff in order to take this model on up to even a more optimum level. So they're funding some extra staff on their own because of it. So.
I'm interested in why, in general, in schools across the state, response to intervention programs are generally not having the impact on gap reduction and novice reduction that we hope. And so I'm wondering, how does this model work with RTI? Is this primarily what you would consider a tier 1 intervention, or how do those parts fit together?
Yeah, we would consider it a tier 2 intervention, but what's happening is in shared learning, the support is being pushed into the classroom. And the other thing that we feel like is key, if you notice there in one of those stations, the students are getting prerequisite skills, but they aren't just random prerequisite skills. They're the prerequisite skills that they need in order to rotate and then get the core lesson. And we feel like sometimes in a traditional RTI model, number one, instead of being pushed in, the students are being pulled out. Right. And when they're being pulled out, those prerequisite skills are being addressed, but they're sort of random prerequisite skills. They aren't connected to the learning in the classroom. So I think sometimes inadvertently, by pulling them out and providing that, you close one gap, but another gap is created. from them not being in the classroom. And so we consider it a Tier 2 intervention, and then we still do have some students who are at the top of the pyramid who need that. It's a small population, but those students then at another time during the day would get an extra session of reading or math.
And that would primarily be either with their special education teacher or an interventionist?
So most of the time, a core teacher or a special education teacher.
Same teachers.
Same teachers.
Right.
Gary, I think that's a key part of it as well, is even with the intervention, right, you're pushing in rather than pulling out, and every kid, regardless of level, is getting access to that core instruction from the general education teacher. I think that's a huge, huge part of the model.
And we mentioned a minute ago, I think it's important to say again, if you know, Chelsea mentioned coming in, I came in her classroom earlier in the week, and if I come into her regular classroom or her shared learning classroom, the learning target on the board is the same, the exit slip that students are taking at the end of the class is the same, at the end of the unit, the district-wide common assessment that they've built is the same. It's the same for all students, so it really helps to hold that expectation high for all of our students.
So regular education teachers aren't necessarily using this model all day long.
Right.
It's just during those classes where they have those students who need these supports that are there.
Which is what, it's a little counterintuitive to put all students who struggle in the same room at the same time. But the beauty of that is then it allows you to pool all of your resources, your human resources, in the same room at the same time to get to those small groups, which is what then eliminates engagement as a variable.
Yeah, and forgive me if you said this already, but how often are they reshuffled? They're flexible groups.
It
depends on the data.
Depends on the data.
Depends on the data. They could be, they could literally change groupings daily.
Okay.
Certainly weekly.
Great.
And that speaks, I think, to our teachers' expertise of really using their data to drive instruction and doing that extra work.
Good. Thank you all.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
The magnitude of what has been accomplished in just 3 or 4 very short time frame, I have to tell you, blows me away. I mean, the fact that, about 1 out of every 6 of your students in the school in a 3 or 4 year time frame have moved from a novice area, the net move is up to proficient, is a move that is, I can't remember the last time I've ever seen a move like that. I mean, the boldness to come up with a new model, the courage to actually implement it. I know it's exhausting work, but what a legacy, what a legacy your team is leaving behind, and the difference in those children's lives. It just gives me chills, just goosebumps, just thinking about it. So, we wanted to thank you for being here today. This has been a tremendous presentation. We really appreciate it. So, if you join me in thanking them.
Oh, wait, Marty.
Chair Reiner, just a moment. I can't let this moment pass. I would love for Superintendent LaFavors, because this team is so awesome, to share just a little bit about how what you have done on the grassroots has impacted all the way up to the state level, Mike.
Thank you for that. Marty always puts me on the spot. Appreciate Dr. Lewis inviting us. Marty setting that up for us here. Our chair.
Superintendent, if you could find a microphone, that would help people that are watching online, or just pull up a chair or whatever you'd like.
Don't mind me. Sorry about that. And we truly do have, the team you see here today, we have a lot of strong teachers in the district. Dr. Lewis got to see those on his visit. They're some of our very best, strong administrative team. I think people are attracted to Boyle because of the work we're doing. And we've got some sharp people here, so I really appreciate them. I think they did a great job of describing the work. David said, success across all assessments. If you take ACT, we started celebrating students who scored 28 or higher about 7 years ago. And the first time we have the president of Center College delivers an address to them, and we give them a medal. First time we did that, we had 13 students in the room. And it was a large room, and there were 13 students with their parents, and it was just kind of I was awesome that we were doing it, but it just kind of, only 13 students. Last year we had 52. This year 49. We're now 20% of our student population who scored 28 or higher on the ACT. The national average is 9. So we were behind the national average 7 years ago. So what David said is true. We've been recognized now in North America as a distinguished school in advanced placement exams. The Wall Street Journal recently asked ACT to come up with the 4 districts moving kids the fastest in ACT in mathematics, and it was us and a district in Virginia, a district in Tennessee, and one in New Jersey. So I get to sit back every day and just watch it. I almost get a little emotional talking about it, but just awesome people impacting students, and we've got students who just work so hard. So thank you all for highlighting us. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It's okay with the board members. We'll take a 5-minute, and we'll try to keep it to 5 minutes. We still have a lot before midday break. So we'll recess here for 5 minutes, and please be back.
All right, sir. Sure. 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
All right, we're back in session here. Earlier this year, the board adopted its own mission statement. It reads, "To place Kentucky schools on a steep trajectory of improved student outcomes, the Kentucky Board of Education will develop and adopt policies focusing on," and then it lists 7 areas. And we've asked the commissioner to respond at our future meetings, today being the first one, to pick 2 of those 7 items and talk about what kind of advancement are they making in those items that are on our mission statement. The ones for today are flexibility for district innovation, and the second is strengthening the skills and expertise of educators. And with that, Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
Associate Commissioner?
Yes, sir. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We want to highlight a few of the key areas where we believe we're making progress that align with the board's mission. First, in the area of flexibility for district innovation, and Amanda and I will take these together, and we're happy to take questions. Districts of innovation. You adopted changes to the regulations for the Districts of Innovation program in the state. It's a program that's been in place, I believe, since 2013. One of the barriers we identified with that program was that the regulations put a few more constraints on applications and how the program operates than the statute required. And so with the regulations, the revision to regulations that you adopted and the way the program is operating now, the application has been streamlined a bit more. In the hopes that we would encourage more districts to apply, to participate. We want districts to consider possibilities for innovative programs in their districts and in areas where regulation and or statute get in the way. We want them to identify those things and then apply to you for waivers from those statutes and regulations. So we're proud of that work. Over the next year, I think we'll have a better sense of how those changes in the regulation will result in increased application and hopefully some more innovative programming coming out of our local school districts.
So the next one we had identified, and there are many more, as you all know, when we were first asked to do this, we had a list of things. So we were just highlighting a few, but the things that are probably also relevant is the individual learning plan. This is also in connection with the minimum high school graduation requirements. And the reason we put this in flexibility is initially we had purchased a vendor to provide a career exploration survey and things, and we asked all districts to use it, and it became a compliance piece rather than a real meaningful opportunity for advising students on possible careers. So we have taken that barrier out, and the impression that they had to use it, that was a big complaint. We did not renew that, but we've really provided guidance and support to districts, but to really encourage the development of stronger advising and make it much more authentic. If you all remember when we've talked about this multiple times, really, the ILP really was intended as a tool to help drive conversation between adults and students to kind of start thinking about what they may be interested in, where they may want to pursue after they leave high school. And so that's something we have removed as something that would feel as a compliance-driven piece to be much more at an ownership level, ownership at a local level. And we've seen lots of great models. We're still working through that. We're still providing support because with greater flexibility comes greater responsibility. And so we still want to provide that guidance support, but we certainly don't want to mandate a tool that may not fit all. And we know that that's not always the case. Do you want to
Dr. Damian Sweeney, who is our lead, what is Damian's title?
He is our counselor coordinator.
Counselor coordinator. Is the second person in that position, former Commissioner Pruitt created. Robin McCoy, who was previously in that position, took an opportunity back in Nelson County. And Damian joined us just a couple months ago on an MOA from Jefferson County Public Schools. He's doing a fantastic job. And one of the things he is doing doing is going out around the state and working with districts, working with administrators, working with school counselors around this individual learning plan framework, and helping districts to understand the flexibility that they have to use that as a tool to help kids plan for their pathways in school that align with what they want to do at the post-secondary level and in their careers. And so Damien's on the road quite a bit doing that work, but we're looking forward to seeing how districts use that greater flexibility for the benefit of kids. As Amanda was saying, that flexibility aligns perfectly with what you adopted with the minimum high school graduation requirements. As you know, in areas like English and in mathematics, you granted districts much greater flexibility in the courses that students can take. But what's also a part of that regulation is you've said that with that flexibility, the courses that students do enroll in, that they do complete, need to be aligned with their individual learning plans. And so that advising, those conversations between students, adults, and parents should be taking place, and it is required that the courses that they're taking are aligned with that planning. So we look forward to seeing how districts on local boards of education revise their local high school graduation requirements in response to the greater flexibility that this board has given. And then the second area on the board's mission statement. I'm sorry.
Can we stick with that first area just for a minute,
Yes, sir.
see if we have any
Yes, sir.
questions? We heard also from a superintendent this morning on related to reorganization within their department, that statute was, sort of straitjacketing them and would take 10 years to are we working on, do we have, other than these 3 items, which are significant, but do we have other items that we are working on with superintendents around the state, items that they've brought to you on, we know you're about flexibility, and this is an area that, in statute or in regs, a problem for us. These are 3 important ones. Are there others? How many might there be? Or is this pretty well completing what we thought we'd work on for flexibility?
So there's a combination of things. These are things that we have done at the department and the board level. These are initiatives at the department and board level. Lots of the things, including what Superintendent Polio brought to us this morning in the area of flexibility, are beyond what we can do at the board and department level. They require statute change. We are having those conversations with superintendents and with the General Assembly, and we are supportive of those efforts. So administrative tenure is one of those areas that Superintendent Polio hired. And in summary, it is this: superintendents, particularly in an instance like his, when there is a desire to reorganize a central office comprised of most of the time, really hardworking, dedicated administrators, there's not as much flexibility as you would think with being able to move folks out of administrative central office positions and back into schools, into instructional positions. And it's because of this, what we call administrative tenure, which is in statute. So we've had that conversation with Superintendent Polio. We've talked with other superintendents. If that's an area that the General Assembly would decide to move on, I think it could be really helpful, particularly to him. Another area where we believe this type of flexibility is really important is in the legislation that has passed the Senate that would give superintendents the authority to hire principals. Right now, Kentucky's law requires that principals be hired by school-based decision-making councils, of which superintendents have a seat on school-based decision-making councils. We believe there are great possibilities for SBDM councils. We think in some respects they've been underutilized and underappreciated. We are doing work to strengthen our training on SBDM councils to help people understand what their roles are, and so that they can actually participate much more meaningfully in school-based decision-making councils. With that said, we believe the authority of to hire the building principal should be with the superintendent. Superintendents and local boards of education are held accountable for results in their district, for improving academic achievement. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, quite honestly, that they would not have the authority to hire senior level leaders at the building level. If we're going to hold them accountable, we have to give them the flexibility and the autonomy to hire the people that they believe are best prepared and best suited to lead their schools. So those are two areas.
And I would assume with the legislature that they would look pretty heavily, pretty heavily for the department for input on, are you an advocate for this or are you opposed to it? And our role there would be important.
We've had conversations, and we've certainly let our partners in the General Assembly, particularly in the Senate, know that we are supportive. We testified in support of a bill in the Senate Education Committee that would ensure that the tribunal process for teachers challenging administrative decisions on termination or suspension to ensure that process is a fair one that protects the due process rights of teachers, but also ensures that superintendents don't have the deck stacked against them when they go to a tribunal hearing. We're in a place right now where I believe the numbers are around 75% of those tribunals. If I'm wrong, Todd, you let me know. I think we're talking about the neighborhood of 75% of the decisions made by superintendents in terms of termination, suspension tend to be overturned by tribunals. I don't know what the right percentage should be, but there is very seldom disagreement around the statement that the process does not seem to be fair right now. And to be clear, when you get to a tribunal hearing, you're not talking about a superintendent that's made a decision about terminating a teacher for instructional ineffectiveness. Right. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really serious offenses. I can't name a district, to be honest, in Kentucky where a teacher has been terminated on a continuing contract for instructional ineffectiveness. These are serious issues, and so we need to ensure that when superintendents believe it is appropriate to remove a teacher for very serious reasons, that it is a fair process that protects the teacher, but also is fair to the district.
Commissioner, these data about the number of administrative decisions that are altered or overturned by tribunals, those are just the cases that actually made it to tribunal.
That's right.
Those numbers have a real chilling effect on superintendents feeling like they can make the bold personnel decisions that they sometimes need to do because of the cost of a tribunal and the real potential as we see that their decision will be overturned. So,
that's right.
So this is a real area where the districts need some relief in terms of having administrative autonomy.
And what the superintendents tell us, Gary, I mean, right in line with your statement, is that very often, rather than make a tough disciplinary decision, when they know a teacher needs to be removed, they won't make the decision because they believe the deck is stacked against them at the tribunal. Sure. Hearing process, and so they'll just try to find a way to move that person to a place where they can be less harmful to kids.
That's right. And we need to move on. Oh, Ben? Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Am I right that at least one of the districts of innovation originally lost its designation? That everybody
I believe there was at least one.
And how does that happen?
David will have the...
Yeah.
David's back there.
David, come on, David.
Maybe the question is, what can be the causes of that?
And David, what I'd ask you to do too in responding, answer in terms of how the process used to work, right, as well as how it would work now with their change with the red.
Sure.
David, if you'd introduce yourself,
I'm
just for
sorry.
people watching, it'd be great.
I'm David Cook. I'm the Director of Innovation here at the Department of Education. So to your initial question, Ben, one of the 4 original districts, Danville Independent, was placed on probation, which is the first step that occurs has occurred in the process. And they went something like what happened to Jefferson County. They went under a corrective action plan. In their situation, they completely diverted themselves from the plan that they had written and applied for innovation status with. They changed administration, new superintendent, and the new superintendent went in a completely different path. And we felt like they weren't doing anything. It wasn't just like one area. They had just completely shifted all of their approaches. So we put them on probation. They took their plan back and really started implementing it district-wide. And after a year, we came back to the board, and they were taken off probation until such time as their first 5-year status was completed. Then they chose not to reapply. So at that point. Now, there's a little bit difference in that process is still in the regulation for probation and revocation, but we're doing it a little differently in the way that we monitor and report that. We're still going to be looking at their plan, looking at data, but we're not going to get really deep into like an audit type of visit in the same way that we did before, which is how we did it before. We look more at their data and their reports and make a decision based on that kind of information.
And I know we need to move on to the next area, but one final question on this, Commissioner. Do you feel the superintendents understand that the department's eyes and ears are wide open, willing to look at possibilities for increased flexibility for innovation in their districts? Has that word gotten out, do you feel?
I think it is true for some of them. I think for superintendents that have been willing to engage with us and have conversations with us, I think that's clear. I think there are still some superintendents who, rather than engage with us, go by maybe what they hear or what they think our position might be. I think we make tremendous progress with districts and superintendents who are actually willing to talk to us.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I say one real quick thing, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. David?
In relation to Dr. Lewis's comment about increasing the number of districts involved. We had just gotten approval from the legislature finalizing the new regulation changes, so we're just now sending out new applications and so forth. But the previous system, the 4 districts who started our work, all 4 chose not to participate after their 5-year status ended for a lot of the reasons that were regulatory. All 6 of the remaining districts have already notified me that they're going to write new plans and present deeper asks for flexibility because of the changes. So I know once we really get the word out about the new regulation, there's going to be a bunch of people calling on us to say, where's the application, how do I apply? So I think it's going to do what we hoped it would do.
Okay, thank you.
I think this need for statutory change really needs to be adopted with the utmost urgency by this department. If we have, in Jefferson County alone, $100 million additional that can be put into the classroom without costing any money and potentially making a leaner, more responsive organization in the process, that needs to be done immediately.
And Rich, I want
to be a top drawer item for us in our legislative agenda.
It absolutely is. I want to reiterate one of the points that Dr. Polio made in his presentation, and that is that his plans and his direction for what he'd like to do in terms of reorganization are not because he doesn't have hardworking people. And our support of legislation that would take a second look at this idea of administrative tenure is not because we don't believe there are hardworking people who are showing up every day and doing their absolute best for kids. It is simply because we recognize that as organizations change over time, as direction and priorities change, any type of organization, from a school to a grocery store, that there's the need sometimes to reshape the organization, including where you allocate human resources.
Yes.
And it ties superintendents' hands behind their backs to be able to make those types of critical decisions when you say just because somebody's been in that position for 2 or more years, you can't move them. Kids should really be driving those decisions. We want to protect adults and give them due process, but these have to become kid-centered decisions first.
Exactly, and I can't see how the existing policy adds value to the educational process. I don't see that.
Dr. Ellis?
All right. So we'll go on and start into our second board goal, which is the strengthening the skills and expertise of educators. And Wayne and I feel like really there's not much we can say today after Boyle County spoke, because they are absolutely the picture of what we would love to see. We have visions of seeing in all districts in different settings, because it's a process that they've committed to. That's not a program or a thing that goes away. It's how they do business every day. And so the first thing that we have on here that is an ongoing piece, and you all have been inundated, especially Dr. Houchins and his committee have had to do this. Of course, Kathy's learned a lot about standards too, and but the Kentucky Academic Standards revision and implementation process is not just a requirement of the law, but it really has been an incredible learning experience for the teachers involved. This really has been teacher driven. I cannot express to you enough how true that is. Wayne met them up on a Saturday morning to see the social studies team hard at work, and the conversation that goes on, the due diligence of reading through all the comments, the feedback, making revisions, digging into the research, looking at the architecture of how it really should be structured, and better meeting the needs of our teachers to provide the best for students has been an incredible process that continues to go. And so, of course, social studies will be heard today, but the other piece of that is really what Boyle County described, and really what Dr. Lewis described today in his opening comments for his report around the importance of it being standards aligned, so grade appropriate assignments and instructional materials, ultimately the belief that students can achieve, and the importance of engagement. And really, I don't think Boyle County could have supported his data any better. And we, we are taking the opportunity myth, and it's exactly what he had spoken about. We are working with our co-ops. They've been excellent partners and have jumped right in and planning the standards rollout specifically aligned to those 4 pieces. So it's not just learning how to read a document. We had good standards. We have standards we can go through it. That's not what's going to make the difference. You really heard today that if you take those standards and align the instruction, and you're intentional with how you instruct, and you hold the beliefs that all students can achieve those standards, it changes the way you work. It changes the way you do things, and that's what we're really rolling out with support around building leaders and what their role is. When we talked about the walkthroughs, that teaches the leader how to coach the teacher in real time, and which is what is absolutely necessary. And so that's one piece that we really feel like that's an ongoing piece of strengthening our skills of educators at all levels. And that's really an emphasis we're putting on, because that's a part of equity. If you don't have equitable access to high quality teachers and instruction, it doesn't matter where you come from, you're not getting what you need. And if somebody doesn't believe you can accomplish it, you're already at a deficit. And so that's something we're really hitting hard. And I think you'll see on Twitter, there's been a lot of online chats with Opportunity Met, the tools that are there to really do an assessment of what's going on in the district, what's going on in the school, what's going on in the classroom, because that's not based on a test score. It is based on what goes on every single day in that classroom. And that's why that research has been so influential on the drive that we're pushing on with instruction and what we do with our standards, because it's something we can change today. It's not something we have to wait till May, get the results in August, and go, oh, well, now we need to make a change. We know the changes we need to make. So that's one piece. Do you want to talk about, Kate?
Sure. Sure, and then just to close that thought, one of our division directors who's leading the standards work, Krista Hall, who you all have heard of, heard from quite a bit. She said something a couple weeks ago to a group of teachers and talking about standards rollout and standards implementation that I think aligned really nicely with what you heard from Boyle County. And she was talking about our previous rollout of standards with the adoption of our last set of standards, that in some ways we may have robbed teachers of the opportunity to do the hard work of deconstructing standards, digging into them themselves to better understand them and think about and plan for how to teach the standards in an effort to try to give it to them faster, give them tools where they didn't have to maybe do as much deconstruction for themselves. What you heard from the teachers in Boyle County was that deconstruction of the standards is a critical part of their work. And that's key, because when the teachers engage in that work, every teacher engages in that work, they know those standards at a level like they could not possibly know if someone else did it and handed the tools to them. I think it's perfect to be number one here under strengthening the skills and expertise of educators. Some of you have probably all of you have heard of our work around Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. This is really the next iteration of a previous program supported by the General Assembly called the Minority Educator Recruitment and Retention Scholarship. It's a forgivable loan program. The General Assembly appropriated $1 million to be spent in each year of the biennium to support this program. Previously, the dollars flowed through the department to post-secondary institutions and went to support students of color who were pursuing credentials, degrees in teaching. This version of the program, CATE, as we call it, is intended to increase diversity in the teaching profession, to support teaching excellence for those folks going into teaching, but it broadens significantly the eligibility criteria for the program. So students of color continue to be eligible for the program, as well as low-income students, first-generation students, students with veteran status, with migratory backgrounds, graduates of Kentucky School for the Deaf, Kentucky School for the Blind, students with disabilities. There's just a range of different areas, all areas where we need to increase the diversity of our teacher workforce. And so we're really excited about that. The other piece that's different in this program than the way the Minority Educator Recruitment Scholarship worked is KDE is playing a much more central leadership role in the program. So previously, the dollars went to post-secondary institutions. It was very decentralized. They selected students and supported those students with the dollars. KDE this time, under the leadership of Division Director Robin Hebert, is receiving applications for the program. So they're submitting those applications to us. We play a central role in the selection of candidates. We are also building programming around those teacher candidates to support their development as teachers, making sure that they're getting mentoring experiences and tying them in with even younger students who we want to get interested in the teaching profession through our Ed Rising work. And so we're really excited about Kate.
Commissioner, this is all for initial teacher certification. That is discussion about advanced credentials and similar kinds of support.
Not yet, Gary. And honestly, it'll be really interesting to see how this goes. It's $1 million for each year of the biennium. Under the program, when it was the MER program, there were dollars that went unused. It'll be interesting to see if we use all of the dollars this time. My guess is that we will. My guess is that we will. This is open to undergraduate students pursuing the teaching credential at our public post-secondary institutions, as well as our Kentucky private independent post-secondary institutions. It's also open to students pursuing the master's degree with the initial certification. So at UK, it's the MIC program. At our other institutions, it's often called the Master of Arts in Teaching, where folks are pursuing that master's and want to get that first teaching credential. I think there's big need, absolutely, in advanced certification. I do think the appropriate first place is that getting them into the pipeline, getting them into the teaching profession, because when we look at advanced certification programs like school counselors, school principals, superintendents, experience as a classroom teacher is a prerequisite for all of those. And I think if we can at least first concentrate our efforts on increasing the quality and diversity of our candidate pools going into the teaching profession, that it should have an impact, a positive impact on moving those folks into administrative positions as well.
And then to wrap up, one of the other pieces that we do, actually, Dr. Kelly Foster and her team lead this, but it's Lead Kentucky. It's a leadership training that's in partnership with the National Institute for School Leadership, or what they call NISL. She and her staff train almost up to 100 leadership each week, or each year. It's twice a month that they meet, and it's usually principals or central office staff and also teacher leaders. So they work on, I think, a lot of what Boyle County, again, what their leadership staff talked about, being very strategic with their human capital resources, with their physical resources, continuous improvement, what they want to do to really structurally impact their schools and their districts. It's an intensive training. It has high results on really people in leadership feeling like they're better prepared for their role. It's a very unique role, and sometimes assumed that people know what to do. And so it's that development of the leadership skill set to lead schools and districts into success. And of course, Kelly has staff that is trained, so it's nice to have on-the-ground help in Kentucky with Kentucky trainers. They do a phenomenal job. They've done this for several years, and it yields great results. And so we just wanted to highlight that. It's not new, it's not a new initiative, but it certainly supports the strength of skills and expertise of our educators and our leaders. And if you heard this morning, I really hope that you heard that not only did central office support the movement of what's going on in the classroom, but that the school leaders had very clear roles of what they did to remove barriers. They had a real clear vision of what they expected of their teachers and how they set schedules, how they ensured that they removed barriers for the teachers to be able to have common planning, and what that expectation was. They had very important roles, critical roles, that supported the teachers to be able to do their work and to make the moves that were necessary to ensure that. And I think that was a great example of being a strategic leader and focused on instruction to do what they could do to remove the barriers for teachers to do their work. And so to me, that was a great example of a lot of what's discussed and how we help support leadership development and thinking about how to do things differently. Because I love when you ask the question about the cost. Sometimes you don't really have more money, but you can certainly get creative with the staff that you have and the structure and what you do with the time you have with students. And to me, that was a great testament of strategic leadership this morning. But that's very similar to some of the things that they work on throughout the year.
Questions, Kathy?
Yeah, I was on that point. I really wished Marty Polio had been able to stay and hear the Boyle County presentation. I know he's got a great big job and he had to leave, but I thought that some of the things that they went through are so applicable to Jefferson County, I thought anyway.
Powerful.
I think so too, and I'll be frank here, Kathy. Jefferson County has some structural barriers that prevent them from being able to do some of the things that Boyle County does.
More indifferent than Boyle County? I thought it was just a statute that would have applied as well to Boyle County.
Well, when you think about what Boyle County does in terms of the way they allocate personnel resources, the way they provide frequent and ongoing feedback and monitoring of their teachers, the way they move teachers around depending on the needs of the kids, how they have the flexibility to be able to do that sometimes a couple weeks after receiving a couple weeks of data or a couple months of data. Those things aren't easy for Boyle County to do, but they are much more difficult for Jefferson County to do.
But what is the difference then, if you'll excuse my ignorance?
Well, mean, the collective bargaining agreement with Jefferson County Teachers Association it makes it more challenging to be as nimble as Boyle County has been with the strategic allocation of human resources.
And administrators are also covered by contract there as well.
Correct.
Really?
One other question. Professional development, we've been talking about Boyle County, and I don't recall from their presentation do they have increased professional development for their teachers beyond what you might see in a district that hadn't, isn't in this kind of intensive model? Or
I don't know specifically if they have additional hours, but what they have done is broken the model of you have 4 days you have to do professional learning. They do a lot of embedded, ongoing professional learning, which is, if you heard, that's why they want to protect that teacher time once a week. That is professional learning. When they're digging into the data, identifying what the students need and how they're going to restructure their instructional strategies, that's a lot of the professional learning. So I think they obviously do what is required, but if they really place an emphasis on that embedded ongoing, and that's the key to professional learning and keeping their teachers engaged and really empowered to feel like they can do. And if you heard the teachers, they said we share everything. I think that sharing of everything on how they share resources, how they share expertise with each other, and they play on the expertise. So if somebody's really strong in mathematics, that teacher is a teacher leader in that content, which is a learning opportunity without them having to pay somebody to come in for the day and everybody sit and get. It's really that ongoing, I'm going to try this, I'm going to see how the data play out, I'm going to adjust. That ongoing continuous improvement cycle is incredible. I mean, that really is, I think, what I would call their secret sauce to professional learning. So I will definitely be happy to ask Mr. Young about that, but I don't think that they add like mandatory things on. I think it's really the way that their schedule's set to ensure that they have protected time together.
Is a minimum professional development for, is the minimum amount of professional development, is that set by the state or that's set by each district on how they want to approach it?
There is minimum. There's a minimum amount that's outlined in regulation. We can look at that again, but certainly districts can use that in the way that they want. They have flexibility around that. There is a minimum, though, for professional development.
And I've actually heard from a superintendent or two sort of a lack of flexibility in professional development, so maybe sometime future meeting or sometime we could talk about that a little bit. Be interested in where that comment was coming from.
Yes, sir.
I think it's very obvious just with the actual connection you have with the students in that particular environment. That's the same focus we need to have on these teachers if we intend to retain them. It's sitting them in a classroom from a human resource perspective is very ineffective. Professional development, mentoring, one-on-one connection is going to foster that. So
absolutely.
To that end, Laura, I think I'll highlight one of the things that David said was key around scheduling, was that they schedule and allocate human resources first and foremost around the needs of kids.
That's right.
So they look at the needs of kids, they look at kids that need extra support, and then they schedule and assign teachers to places first and foremost based on that, not based on first and foremost what's most convenient for adults or where adults want to be or where adults feel like they've earned the place to be. That those human resource allocation decisions are kid-centered decisions first. And if we're really going to make movement on gap closure across the state, we're going to have to start making a whole lot more of our education policy and human resources decisions based on kids' needs first.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that comes back apparently with the TEL survey is one of the two main comments is not enough time for collaboration, particularly for new teachers who need the help. And the other is that although they do professional development, they don't always wind up doing what they need or what even bears in relation to what their area is. Sometimes it's done however it's most convenient.
That's right.
That seems like a serious waste of resources.
I agree completely.
All right, we need to wrap up. Okay, last question, Kathy. We have about 1 minute.
Okay, well, I guess I just want to say I think that this is such an argument for school choice because this is the one link that incentivizes people on the other end is when parents get to choose where their kids go to school. And that there's nothing that is more powerful in keeping providers of goods and services on their toes, that they have to constantly be wooing and winning hearts and minds of customers. And we don't have that. And all I can feel and think whenever we have these discussions about how we're supposed to incentivize, we love to look at Boyle County, but we're relying on individual people who are so inspired to do that kind of thing, and that's great. More power to them. But they're the exception and not the rule. And I'm just so frustrated by the fact that parents are out of this equation altogether, and that it would help so much if we could get some of that into our thinking about how we want to change things here in Kentucky. So, did I do 60 seconds?
Thanks. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is career and technical education funding streams. This is just an informational item to, we've probably successfully created over the last decade one of the, at least from my view, one of the more complicated ways to fund career and technical education at a time merits looking at, especially at a time that that it's really moved to the forefront, where every student needs some post-secondary in order to be successful after high school. So today's just an informational item, sort of the beginning of a discussion on where does the funding come from for career and technical education, and we have state-run area technology centers and locally run, and it gets more interesting after that. So with that, Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So as you all know, this board has made it a priority, and the department has made it a priority to strengthen our work in career and technical education, to expand opportunities for kids to pursue career pathways, particularly those that are aligned with our top 5 high-demand sectors. In Kentucky, we're working in collaboration with our post-secondary partners and with our partners in the Education Workforce Development Cabinet to ensure that we're all moving in the same direction. One of the major concerns that I have in this area, however, is the current structure of career and technical education, including how it's funded, is very confusing, first and foremost. Second, I question whether the current structure is appropriate to support the goals that we have for expanding career and technical education. And third, there are some things that I believe it is incredibly important for us to bring to your attention, as our staff has brought to my attention, around decisions that we make at the department level around how we allocate resources and how those align with what is in statute and in regulation. So this is a really important conversation. I think it is absolutely essential that we have it. We want to be completely transparent with you, and I want you to know from the very beginning of this conversation that I am very concerned about this area, particularly about structure and funding. And I'll return at the end after my colleagues present some information with you, because I would appreciate your feedback and your thinking on how we should move forward.
With you, I'm David Horseman, and this is Kylie Whitaker, who's done a lot of the work along the way. So we're going to try to inform you on the funding that comes through our office that translates into career and technical education funding. So if you look, our total funding to the office after the reorg that occurred in November is around $62 million. Now, 22 million is what we call is SEEK funds, but that's not the SEEK funds from the districts. That's a separate line item in the budget, SEEK funding. And zero of that is used by KDE at all. And then there's 39 million plus in general funds that are allocated as well. So when we look at this, this is a little visual that I thought would help you understand. We talk a lot about central offices, and KDE is only using 6% of that money, of that total. So let's break it down a little more. Of the 22 million in SEEK, 20% of that goes back to the school districts that own ATC buildings, and that would be all districts. KDE does not own any of the facilities that our ATCs live in. And there's 1.4 million because of access to all programs is not available through ATCs or a local career center. Then we allow some funding to those students that can go to the community college and get that access. And then 17 million of that goes to ATC personnel and operating. Then the general funds are broken down with 20 million going to ATC personnel and about 3.3 to operations. And then the 11.8 million is allocated for funding to locally operated career and technical centers.
Please stop us wherever you have questions.
Yes.
Now, this is separate from the state-operated ATC.
Yes. I'm going to give you an overview of the ATC, our office. That's kind of what I've done now, and then we'll break down what the ATC group looks like. And then we'll go into and so maybe it would be a good time after we do the ATCs, if you have questions about that part, then we'll move into before we move into local.
Pretty complex structure.
Mm-hmm. And just keep in mind, ATCs, our area technology centers, those are our state-run technical high schools. We're going to move, after David finishes with ATCs, to the locally operated centers as well. Sometimes in conversation across the state, you will hear folks use the term ATC interchangeably whether they're talking about a state-run school or a locally operated school, but we really intentionally separate those terms. ATCs refers to the state-run versus the locally operated centers because the funding is very different.
Yes. If I could just make sure we're all on the same page here. So the state operates, last I heard, was 53 area technology centers spread all across the state that may serve more than one district.
Here's the graphic. I'm coming with that. We can go to that graphic right now if you want to.
I think just a fundamental. There are 42 locally operated centers where the school district said, no, either there wasn't a state one available nearby, we just want to run it ourselves. It's run mostly with local money, not with state money. So the teachers in the state 53 centers are employees of KDE, but the facility is owned by the local district. But we give them some money to kind of rent the facility. Of the 42 that are locally operated centers, the center, it's their facility and it's their teachers. So we have 95 almost evenly split, some locally operated, some state operated out of Sauer building. For the 53. So I just want to make sure everybody understands when we're talking about locally operated, they're doing the same thing, but some are state, some are not, and anyway, therein lies some of the complexity.
And the 42 are not a part of this budget?
They are. You'll see locally operated centers in there.
But we'll break down what piece of that budget they get.
They're a small piece.
The funding is even more complicated than the structure.
So let's proceed. Let me see if I've got, so I've done that one and that one. And then when we look at the law in regarding to ATC operations, for expenditures and management, you can see there 156, 802, and 842 are very broad, saying that KDE, or the Office of Career and Technical Education, has the authority to manage these centers. So that's the amount of guidance that's in regulation, in law about that. So, so with that, some of the data that the commissioner was talking about, or the chair was talking about, we have 53 centers, and we serve almost 23,000 individual students. Now, those aren't there necessarily all day. It's a mixture of 1, 2, 3, 4 periods a day. And that's the third most schools in a school district. So from the state level, we're operating 53 schools. Now, they're from 7 to 10, 12, 14 in staff. They're not like the size of a classical high school, but we have right at 550 to 600 employees of this department that are in those schools. So that kind of gives you an idea of how big it is. Now, when we look at that, we've got $3.3 million for operations to fund 53 schools. This past year, we had to increase our budget for utilities that come out of that to $2.37 million. And you know the creep that has, all of you that have your own business know how that creeps into profits or your other resources. And so now we're down at less than $1 million and for the ATC operations for other things like school supplies, professional development, all those. So we're looking at about $154 per full-time equivalent student. So just a quick look at this. We've got 92% of our budget is personnel, 6% for utilities, and that's growing, and that has squeezed us down in our school level operation budget to 2%. So, we're at the point of where do you have teachers or do you have supplies? Without, and that's just the nature of, and there's another thing that happens in schools. There's bracket creep in wages. We didn't, when teachers get higher education, they go into a different level, time and grade, so there's automatic increases there. And one other thing that's happened is the contributions to the 18A employees in retirement has nearly doubled this year, and that's a problem that every agency is having. Yes.
Could you re-clarify the $3,300,000? What is that for?
That's for the operations of the schools.
And when you say define operations?
Well, that's utilities, that's school supplies, any welding rods.
So that's overhead.
Aluminum, yeah.
What is the total budget for running the schools?
Around 38 to 40 million.
That 40? I'm sorry?
Between 39, this year it's right around 39 million.
For the 53
schools.
About
$700,000 or $800,000, around $700,000.
So so this is like less than 10% of that budget.
Yes.
For what you're calling overhead, Laura?
I don't know what else you would call it.
Yeah, we don't have rent.
Yeah.
We, out of the SEEK dollars, there are funds that are dedicated that we allocate with rules that the district has to use that to improve the building. And the districts have done a good job working with us. I think over the last, what has it been, about 10 years, we've had those funds available to districts. And we refurbished a lot of those. And the Work Ready Skills Initiative, we've had some schools that have really benefited from that for equipment and all. But now we don't have a separate equipment fund to replace equipment as it's outdated.
Out of the same budget.
It's out of the same budget. That's what we have.
David, who owns the equipment?
Wow.
The state owns the equipment.
Like a machine tool, it's affixed to the building. Who owns that?
We own the equipment unless the district buys some equipment for it. And sometimes we'll have a district that has funds that's willing to buy equipment.
Right.
Now, if the district has a building that's been remodeled as part of their facilities plan and they don't need that money, then they can use that 20% SEEK that they get to buy equipment for the building.
Mm-hmm.
But in most cases, our buildings were built in the late 60s and early 70s. And I know Chair Heiner's been in a lot of them, and he can tell you that they do a really good job with what they have, but we have some that are really, that really are dated. And districts that need that money to fix the building, they don't have extra money to take care of.
Well, and I would say if we're not training our students with updated equipment, it kind of know them as being career ready.
It's difficult.
And to jump in here on the importance of this operations number, so the commissioner and a couple of us toured an ATC on Friday, and talking with the person teaching welding there, saying, how are the industrial certifications going here? What welding certifications are being done here? And they said, well, we're doing in these two areas, but we would have a lot more certifications if we had the raw material, the steel, the aluminum, to teach welding. So the lack of material, physical material, we get some donated, but we essentially have almost no budget for material. So our number of certifications are not nearly what they could be if we had the material that students could train on steel and aluminum for welding. And you hear that and you go away for the lack of scrap steel, kids are not getting industry recognized certifications while they're in high school, and something different has to be done here.
Absolutely.
That just cannot continue.
Well, and another issue is personnel. You spend a 92% on personnel, but you have personnel, you have faculty that is teaching kids who are going to go out as soon as they're successfully completing the program. They're going to earn more in most cases than the teachers.
Some do.
So
that's correct.
How do you have difficulty attracting qualified faculty?
We do. That's we attract great folks, and then they think they can live on $20,000 less, and then they find out that they need to go back.
I know one of the issues many of the ATCs have told me is staff turnover. Many of them don't even complete the year. They're gone by the Christmas
Well,
breaks.
that's improving
drastically there.
Yeah, we've changed our process of onboarding teachers from business and industry, and that's been a positive. We've gone to more of a professional learning model rather than jumping into college courses right out of business and industry. That opportunity is still there, and we have expectations for them to go on and complete it. But that initial first 2 or 3 years, we've kind of eased them into it on some just-in-time instruction to make sure that they have what they need until they get into that groove of being an educator.
So I was going to say, David, in terms of being able to, again, have that, quote unquote, what I would consider a disparity in pay in order to attract those teachers that I would again assume that we are limited and by some regulatory control over what we can pay these folks?
Well, we have a salary schedule that we
Okay.
have to adhere to, yes.
And again, that goes back, that's a problem.
Yes.
So.
Yes. So I'll move on. And here is 156-844 talks about when a district decides, I want to take over the operation of the ATC in my district, I think we can do a better job, or for whatever reason they would like to do that. There is a process. Basically, it's on agreement with the commissioner and the district superintendent, and as part of that process, they receive the same funds for 1 year. And then after that year, the ATC funds are stopped, and then they will move into this locally operated bucket of money that we're going to talk about next. Okay? And part of this regulation also deals with the transfer of employees, because as you were taught, our employees have what they call continuing status with the state, similar to the status of administrators and teachers you were just talking about in the topic before. So there's some clear lines about what their rights are there. And you can read more on that, or if you want to talk to me about it later, I can explain it to you. But there is that option, and that's how that moves through. Now, we're breaking from the area technology centers. to what we call CTCs, and I'll give you an exception of those. Logan County CTC is one of the new Work Ready. They're calling themselves that because it's their building. The board has the right to call it whatever it wants to, but it's an area technology center operation. We're still funding it, but we have a great partnership with them. But I wanted you to be clear, as the commissioner tried to tell you, because they're a CTC, that doesn't necessarily mean they're locally operated. So with that, we had in the budget that we showed you in the beginning, 11.8 of that million of that dollar amount of 62 goes to the 32 districts that operate local centers. Now, there's 32 districts, but there are 42 centers because 2 of our large districts have multiple centers within their district. So now we start taking a look at the laws around the distribution, and I'm going to kind of breeze through this and talk to you about the formulas and some things that are problematic in those formulas, and then the commissioner at the end is going to come back and kind of tie some of this stuff together for you. But basically, if you look, the statute here says that the LAVEX, they were called local area vocational education centers, established after 2001, were not eligible for funding. So that said, from now on, we're done funding those new ones. And then here's another slide that he'll get into more that kind of talks about, well, we've got some budget language that kind of changed some of that, and the commissioner has some say over that. So we'll come back to this at the end. Now, when we start looking at statute versus regulation, if you look up in the statute, I'm trying to see, the last line says the full-time equivalent students shall be calculated on the basis of the total program enrollment divided by the length of the class period divided by 6. What? Well, now, Dr. Thompson, I'm sorry he's not here.
This that we'll explain in just a bit.
We'll give you the formula, but I just want you to know it's there. He's a math guy, and if you know, you math people, think about if you decrease the denominator, what happens. Okay, and then the next, then the regulation says, and I think it's in the first line that says you take that number of hours enrolled and multiply it by the number of students. So you can see these two formulas are going in different directions. So the statute was, when we look at the formula, if we take a look at this formula here, you got 100 students for 2 hours. That's 200, you're going to have a full-time equivalent. That's of 8.3. But if I have those same 100 students for 1 hour, I'm getting twice the full-time equivalent. So if you spend less time in the class, in the classroom, you get more money. So evidently at that time when they started writing the regulations, said, well, that's not right. We've got to fix this. So if you look down below, when you multiply the number of students by the time in the pathway, and then divide that by the number of hours in a day, that gives you your full-time equivalent student falls into what it should look like. So that's kind of the first thing that...
But they never changed the statute.
They never changed the statute.
The statute still says
just that.
What he's laying out.
So to give you a little history, we started back in 2004. I came into the department around 14. Kylie was around 11, 12. From 2004 to 2010, part of our group, the ATCs, were in the cabinet, and then the merger happened between 2010 and 12 with executive orders and legislation taking place. But to give you some idea of how the people in this group changed, in 2007, Bath, Jessamine, Johnson were added as career and technical centers. Now, it says we added Oldham, but that was because Oldham was an ATC and decided they wanted to take the center over. So when they took the center over, then they dropped into this bucket of funds. Then in 2010, you'll see a modest increase in the funding there. And in 2010, Oldham dropped a number of programs. You have to have a minimum of 5 of these programs to have a center. So when they dropped the program, then they dropped out of the locally operated funding. Then in 2011, Scott County was added, and that's Elkhorn Creek, right?
Elkhorn Crossing.
Crossing, yeah. So, and Muhlenberg decided they wanted to take over their area technology center. So now we've added 2 more back in. There's been a little more money added. And then in 2012, Grant and Kenton were added. Grant was a new locally operated center, and Kenton was another ATC that wanted to be taken over by the district. So you see a pretty good bump, that, well, not that much, $500,000 more that year, but they also had a budget cut in 2012, and that dropped it back down to the number that we are now, 11.8. And if you look at the history of what state government and what we started seeing in technology centers from at 8, 9, 10 and on is when budget cuts were starting to happen in state government and impacting. So at that time, they decided that it was decided that that's all the money that was available for that. And just to give you a visual on what this has looked like from 2004, you know, there's been a little movement, but not a lot of movement for, 14 years? So you can see that you saw what's happening with the ATCs. I'm sure that the districts would tell you the same story. Some districts are more affluent, but the majority of the centers that are in rural areas would tell you that they're experiencing the same difficulties. So this is a 3-year graph of the school districts that are receiving funds, and I'm going to show you another one to kind of show you how that, it's hard to see from this picture how the funds fluctuate from school to school, from year to year. But we have one large district, obviously, that gets a lot of the money. But when we take them out and get a closer look, then you can see the fluctuations from year to year for each district. And a lot of the decisions that have been made was to try to make that stability so that, and there have been decisions made on whether or not to add or not add schools, and we'll talk to you about some of those that are not there now. But when you look at the locally operated on a per pupil funding trend, you're looking at, you can see the decline in the amount of money spent on them. Now that seems higher, but we're not including the cost of personnel in here. This is just based on the cost of funds, the amount of funds that we're giving them, okay? So then we have unfunded, high demand or top support pathways in these locals that have added programs that were funded. I mean, the district was funded, but when they added new programs, that was frozen. They have not added those programs. So 1 year 40, another 80. And if those had been added even into those, they would have decreased the funding for everybody else. So I think,
to be clear, that was a department decision.
Yes.
To not add those pathways, to not fund those additional pathways.
Right.
And that was a financial decision.
It is.
I believe it was a financial decision with the thinking. I don't think any of us were here for all of these, but I think the thinking was by adding additional pathways without increased appropriation, that it would impact the current levels of funding for the centers already being funded.
So I would point out here that if we were to add those additional pathways into this measure, those school districts who have the funds to add those new pathways would get a bigger portion of that pot. And those school districts who cannot afford to add new pathways would get even less money than they get right now. And so we, like I said, like Dr. Lewis said, we were not part of the decision-making at the time, but I can see why some of the freeze happened on adding these pathways due to that inequity in who can and cannot add those additional pathways.
The decision-making, to me, makes sense. I understand why the decision-making happened. This is one of the points that I want to make clear to you, though. I don't question the decision-making at all. What I am uncomfortable with as commissioner is that I don't have statute or regulation to back me in those decisions.
To what?
I don't have statute or regulation to support the decisions. That's what makes me uncomfortable. And one of the reasons, we're going to highlight a couple more, but that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring this to you. I understand the decision-making. It made sense. I believe it was for the protection of districts and the protection of programs, but I don't have the law to look back to and say this is why we did it, because the decision-making doesn't align with what the law says.
I had a question. Is this the only funding then that some of these CTE centers are receiving, or are they getting some local money from industry or alumni backing? So
I think that depends. They're a lot like we are. They get donations and those kind of things.
That is not included in this, though.
That's not included.
And is there any way of seeing that on who's getting more local industry support?
I mean, we could survey it, but when we say donations, we don't have somebody pulling up with a truck of stainless steel 4x8 sheets and dropping them off. Right. We have a job site that has conduit left over from building a building and wood. They'll drop it off. They say, you can come pick up our scrap at the factory. Some say, cut it up, weld it, do whatever you want, bring it back. We'll salvage it. Some say you can keep it and salvage it. We have benefactors in all the schools and that's locals as well, that will come in and say, we're building a habitat, we're doing this, we would fund you the supplies to do it. Those kinds of things help. But in terms of large donors that put out, I know there is one district that has a donor that's doing something for a business and marketing program. But outside of that, I'm not aware of any. But some of the businesses that are, I'm sure in Elizabethtown, their partnerships there, and that they have a locally operated center, and they're partnering with the community college there, and they have some connections where they do work for them in the evenings and that. But in terms of big dollar, I'm not aware of any of that going on.
So I would also answer your question. I'm not the finance expert. I would love to have a finance expert answer some of your questions, but I've asked those same types of questions. The funding we provide goes to the district, not to that center. And so the budget, there's not a separate budget out there that says this is the center's money. It goes to the district. And unless a specific munis code or something had been set up to track those funds, there would be no way to pull that from the systems to say that.
But ultimately, it is the district that funds the center.
That's right. And we give some funds to the district, but it is the district that funds the center.
They may have local tax base that they use to supplement what they get.
It is possible.
Like Meade County, for instance, or some stuff.
Is this ever going to show up on the school report card? Maybe, because that's what's online right now. And not all of the financial data has been reported yet, but I'm wondering if it's going to be, so that question could be answered.
For the locally operated, it'll show up as part of the district, what the district receives.
But not by school?
So the district gets, so if the district has more than one center, the district is funded, not the individual centers. And so it doesn't, just because.
I guess your questions are about expenditures.
You won't see the appropriations, I don't think, to the individual centers.
But isn't it ultimately supposed to flow down by the school on our new reporting system from ESSA? No?
Well, the law says the funding goes to the district. And then the district uses the funds, that uses revenue to allocate, it's their center. They use that revenue to allocate as they see fit. It's supposed to,
There's
it's
no way
intended to
citizens can,
support
or
that.
taxpayers or parents or board members can find out.
Yeah. I was thinking under ESSA,
yeah.
that we were required to report the spending per school. And I guess the question is, does that
CTC.
CTC and ATC fall under that ESSA requirement for the spending in that school per student?
Don't know. That'd be, Robin, we'll need to talk about that.
Maybe after
Talk about
lunch,
that.
you can
Right.
I do.
take a minute and address that.
I do want to be absolutely clear, though, on the point here, because part of the reason for this conversation is I want to be completely transparent with you all. On the unfunded high demand or top support pathways, you see pathways under each one of those years that are not funded. The decisions were made to not fund those pathways to protect centers and pathways that were currently being funded. That does not align with what the law says.
What does the law say we should be doing?
The law says that they should have been funded.
What is the 40, 80, 60? Is that,
That's the number of pathways that were unfunded in
And,
those years.
Can you give examples of what you're talking about?
yeah, define a pathway.
Sure. So environmental science is a pathway in agriculture. And in at least one of our buildings, they have an environmental science pathway that goes unfunded every year. It could be one of our residential carpenter assistant pathways. It could be one of our welding pathways. It's different for each school. Computer science, Chair Heiner, in a couple of our schools goes unfunded. So it just varies by school which pathways are unfunded. I have a list of the ones that are unfunded, but I don't want to bore you with every name on that list.
And comprehensive, we haven't even talked about career and technical education programs in high schools that aren't in centers, that receive no funding.
How many
So, I mean-
total pathways are there? I just want to get a scale of
We
what
fund about
40
420 pathways each year in the centers, in these 42
Local,
centers.
yeah, in the local.
About 420.
400.
But I think, can we go back to what I think I'm hearing you say, Dr. Lewis, is what ramifications are we looking at by having not complied with what current law states?
And that's what I'm not sure of.
Okay.
It's one of the
That's what we need to know.
That's really what I really want to make sure you all understand. I understand why the decisions were made. I think the decisions were made, I actually have no doubt that the decisions were made for the protection of districts, for the protection of kids. But if someone asks me in 2018, 2019, those 60 programs, those 60 pathways that are not receiving funding, if we were to follow the letter of the law says they should be funded. And we are not funding them.
Okay.
I need to be very clear with you all, and part of the reason for the conversation here is I need to be very clear with the General Assembly as well, and it's part of the reason why we're asking them, and we'll get to the end, for a task force to take a serious look at structure and funding in moving forward.
So I'm trying to get a scale here or a perspective. If we have 420 pathways, we're not funding between 1% and 2% of them. So what kind of dollars are we talking? I mean,
There's about 10% of full-time equivalent students that would be added to this if we were to fund those additional pathways.
so 10% of the students are being
Full-time equivalent students.
full-time FTE, got that. Getting my acronyms down.
So we fund about 8,600, and there's about 860 full-time equivalent that are unfunded right now.
Okay, and do we have any sense of those pathways and how important they are? I mean, it sounds kind of random, like you don't know which ones are not.
I know exactly which ones are funded and which ones are not, and I could do an analysis to tell you based on labor market need which ones are needed the most, but it's
And
really.
the law doesn't give me the discretion to look at those and make those types of decisions.
So would I be correct in assuming that then our cost would have been that 860 students, the full-time equivalents or whatever? You look at that as an allocation of that total funding that should have occurred, and that's pretty significant dollars.
Right, and those dollars would have come from funds that are currently going to support other programs.
So what you would see is that per pupil amount would be much, much lower than what it is right now, because the total pot doesn't change, just the number of
It's just that
Just the number of students.
What you're saying is that funding all of them.
But everybody is getting funds. Nobody's left out, whether it's the district. Now,
state funds?
Well, where are the rest of the students? If you say you got 800 something that are not getting funded, well, they're still going to class. I'm asking, how are they getting paid? Where is that money coming from?
The local district funds the whole part. We're not adding supplemental funds to those pathways.
Could you move on to the next slide? I think it's responsive
Yeah,
to
I would
Milton
like to
Seymour's
move to this
question.
one.
So this shows existing unfunded schools that have opened and some requests. And these are districts, and you see Oldham County where they've moved in and out and they're back. And when they came back in, they weren't adding any schools back into the fund at that time. So, and then we have Ignite showing up at the bottom, which is another center that's in planning right now that's going to be locally operated. And it's in northern Kentucky, Boone County.
Kenton Boone.
Yes. So, some of these, where we have these and with all the interest and focus on career and technical education, the commission and I are getting a lot more requests and questions. How can we grow? We want to add pathways, and we say we have no funding. So with that, I think that's kind of why we're at this point in the conversation.
Right. And really to kind of recap, if I were to put this into three big categories of areas of concern for me, one is around the formula for locally operated centers, right? There's conflict between the formula in statute and in regulation, and then as well conflict with the way that we actually allocate dollars. Kylie and David highlighted there are a number of unfunded pathways or programs at these centers, some of which by law we should be funding, but at the department level we've made the decision not to protect the districts and schools that were already receiving funding. And then third, statute stopped the allocation of state monies to support locally operated centers in 2001, but then budget language gives the commissioner the authority to approve requests from centers opened after 2001. But that is without appropriating additional dollars. And so I have existing unfunded schools and some open requests today for funds because the budget language permits them to request funds. But without the appropriation of additional dollars, if I were to grant those requests, any of those requests, one, the dollars by law are supposed to flow through formula, and two, it would significantly impact the funding that is currently going to locally operated centers.
Describe exactly how. Again, I know Laura gets it, but I don't.
So
No, you're fine.
There's an appropriation of $11.8 million
Okay,
to support locally operated centers.
okay.
These are our existed unfunded schools because they were established after 2001, as statute says. They have request funding, including the Ignite Academy, which is set to open next school year. And I'm permitted by budget language, it's at my discretion, to approve requests. If I approve requests, then it will significantly impact the funding that is going to schools currently being supported, because there's no additional money in that pot.
It's same one pot.
So if we could take just stop here for just 1 second. In everybody's packet that you have, the folder you have in front of you, there is a draft of a suggested resolution for this board, essentially supporting to the legislature, stating that we support the establishment of a task force to study the structure and funding of career and technical education in Kentucky, that this task force would provide recommendations for legislation prior to the 2020 legislative session, which is a budget session. And my hope that task force would look at really broad, certainly these specific items, but the whole question of area technology centers run by the state, locally operated centers, community colleges that are teaching the exact same courses. I mean, we're trying, hopefully every ATC and local course would be a college credit course, right? Welding 101 in the ATC should be about the same as Welding 101 at the community college. But how that all works together to see if, one, we can find efficiency or fair funding for an area that's a real focus in the state. But if you look back to the funding, we're over a decade here without a dollar increase. The demand is growing. It has been growing. And so anyway, my hope is that we would either pass this draft or something like it here in the next couple of minutes as just as a resolution to the board showing our support for a task force to start after this legislative session, complete before the next legislative session, and hopefully result in some legislation and maybe hopefully some impact on the budget, but look at the entire structure, how we go about career and technical education in the state. And Commissioner, did I state that halfway close?
Absolutely. That's exactly right, Chair.
Well, to get discussion going on that, I'll move for adoption of the resolution
I'll
as
second that.
proposed here.
Okay.
Do you feel...
Motion and approval, and we have discussion now?
Do you feel that if we blow up the structure, reinvent the structure of this thing, that you can find significant efficiencies to make better use of existing dollars if the structure is optimized?
It would be hard for me to imagine coming up with anything that would be worse than what we have now.
Win-win.
If you're going to design it from the ground up, it wouldn't look anything like what we have now.
No.
So what we've done here is kind of a cattywampus sort of convoluted building blocks thing that's like my grandson with Legos. It's all over the place.
It's been pieced together. You know, you merged two groups together from cabinet within the cabinet, and there was some impact there. And at that time, to go back to Senate Bill 1 in '98, that's when the ATCs were with the post-secondary, and they were separated. So there's a lot of things that have happened over that. In terms of efficiency, I would say that we will, if we do it well, the efficiencies will be that we're going to turn out better students and serve business and industry better, because if we start taking a look at what pathways we fund and how they're funded, that not every pathway is created equal. You know, there's a lot of those conversations that if somebody wants to add a program, they may want to add a program in, I don't know, something that's not something that the state would put money toward. But when you look at those top 5 sectors that the state, you know, I think it's those conversations and the alignment of those pathways and working with the post-secondary, how do we seamlessly move back and forth and look at that regional approach rather than just my county, my CTC, ATC. What does my region look like, post-secondary, secondary, and how to deliver it? And then it'll be up to the powers that be to how much funding they want to put toward it.
Well, and is it fair to say then, I mean, these costs for these pathways and these programs that should be supported with state dollars are actually being passed on to the districts. So the districts are actually bearing those costs for a benefit that's really a regional and statewide benefit. So this is another way in which, our districts are having to step up and do more.
That's correct.
That really is a part of our collective commitment as a state.
That is correct. And I want to be clear with this slide here, because I didn't make this clear before. I have open requests from locally operated centers that were established after 2001 that by statute are not receiving funding. You've heard from some of these folks what they are doing and what they're proposing, what Ignite is proposing, I believe is incredible work. We heard from Owensboro Independent, I believe, the last board meeting that we were here. I think it is incredible work. I have not, in all transparency, made a decision yet in terms of approving requests for any of the centers. But I want to be transparent and let you know that if I do approve requests, it will impact the distribution to centers that are currently being funded. And the other piece is, if I'm going to consider approving requests, it would be really difficult for me to pick one and say this is the only one I'm going to fund.
Right.
I feel like we've just jumped into a fiber optic cable box, with 2,000 connections, and probably not going to solve that today. But Ben.
I would just suggest that we tweak this a little bit to point out that not only is it not funded now, but this is a big part of the wave of the future. This is going to be a bigger part of what the overall state picture for education is over the next 10 years than it has over the last 20 years. So not only is it not funded now, but the requests are going to maybe be exponential.
Well, and this has a huge impact on the state's economic development efforts and subsequently our tax base long-term going forward.
It makes it more obvious that it's not a good place to save money because of the trend in education.
Can't cut that.
So a couple of the, lead-in statements under whereas funding and supporting is integral to the future success of the Commonwealth. Funding for state and locally operated centers has remained at the same level or decreased over the last decade, despite the growing importance of career and technical education. I mean, I just couldn't agree more. I mean, for Kentucky's future and our students' future, this is a really key component in college and career readiness for life. Does anyone have any, moving into discussion here, does anyone have any suggested changes before we vote on this resolution? Any wordsmithing in particular?
I'm just curious, when it talks about structure, that's looking at everything from whether or not it is locally owned or state-owned or combination of both or something totally different. That's what we're talking about here when we say structure.
Honestly, Lisa, I think everything has to be on the table. There was a member of the General Assembly that asked me not too long ago in conversation about the potential task force, whether I had an idea of what I wanted it to look like. And the answer is no. I don't. Neither do I enter this conversation in saying KDE has to retain control of the 53 area technology centers, that there needs to continue to be a distinction between what is state-run and locally run. I think we have to enter the conversation with everything on the table and think about what's the best way to be able to provide these types of opportunities to our kids across the state.
And for the clarity there, I guess I'm also looking at program offerings, back to, what should or should not be offered based upon the demand and, like you said, the job market. what are you going to get paid? Can you get a job in it? You know, all those things to me are very important because I know in the past we have had programs that there haven't been, you know, jobs available, and we've talked about that before, and we won't get there. But I just want to make sure that's clear as to what we're really saying: structures, programming, program offerings, and funding. Maybe I just want to make sure that that's what's being said here, what the intent is.
Yeah, I think we're talking about how do you fund particular programs, and right now there's not, that part of the structure is not there. And as he said, you know, we've talked to you about our new Skills for Youth work. We're working with multiple districts now with ATCs and CTCs working together. For example, Four Rivers, we have both there, looking at a regional approach and how that, you know, there's some things out there to look at. And so I think, as he said, we just want, something has to be done to clean it up and get it in a fashion that people can know how to plan for growth and how to fund particular programs.
The whole system needs to be reinvented.
So I would ask you to keep in mind that only 53,000 students are served through the centers, but we have 130,000 CTE students in this state. And so there's no legislation at all for those students that are not in centers.
Well, and my concern too, as we heard it earlier today, there's more kids wanting this kind of training and they can't get into it. So, you know, how do we build growth into this and flexibility? There's technologies today that are coming that we can't even probably fathom today. And so how do we remain flexible and fluid so that we can offer those and not just keep offering the same things over and over and over that may or may not be what we need to be doing?
And like Lisa said, even supporting this, I mean, we should do diligence by our students by supporting this, because we have included this in our graduation and our minimal graduation requirements. So we would be falling short.
I think we're all on the same
Supporting our
page.
students.
Yeah.
We've
I think I'm sensing broad support here.
So, I mean, it
Kathy?
depends on the temperature level you want. I mean, because we could add the word strongly in front of, if we felt that we wanted to call additional attention to in front of urges, but
Is that an amendment, Kathy?
yes, it's a proposal.
I'll okay the amendment.
Okay, thank you. And who seconded? Laura, you okay with that?
Okay with the amendment? Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so now we have the amended resolution in front of us that inserts the word strongly into what's written in front of you. Comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oh, no. Excuse me.
Too late.
Too late. Go ahead.
All opposed, no? Okay, passes unanimously. Milton, do you have a comment?
No, I just saw a signal. I got mixed up.
Okay, all right. All right, let's take a break for lunch. We're running a little late here, so let's try to do about a 35-minute lunch, be back here ready to go.
Chair Heiner, before you break for lunch, I wanted to just say Marty Montgomery is here. Marty, would you come up for a second?
She knows.
She's been back there having a fit because we're running late.
Playing Simon Says in the back.
I was trying, Marty.
So as you all know, this is going to be Marty's last. Marty has been an incredible leader in this department, not only here, but before at the department and the Education Workforce Development Cabinet. And it's been 3 years. We've been working together side by side, and we are really excited about this new opportunity for you, but we are going to miss you incredibly. And so we wanted to just recognize Marty and thank her for her service, and know that she's not leaving us. She's just kind of going to work with us in a different capacity now. Yeah, but is there anything you want to say, Marty?
Yes, I just, I don't want to get choked up. I love each of you. I've known each of you. Some of you I've known for 3 years. And I believe in this work. I believe in the mission and the vision of this board. And I just think probably this is one of the most incredible individuals I've ever worked alongside of. And I am delighted and honored to go forth and put into action, hopefully, what we have been doing for over 3 years here. And I can't thank you enough. I'm sorry, I'm just a little choked up.
You're making me cry.
So as we go to lunch, we're gonna be celebrating Marty.
I'm just heartbroken. That's what we get for having a 2 on this board.